Okay, episode 46 of Counterpoints, a show brought to you by Esportspools, which actually has a very unique feature that, as far as I'm aware, no other gambling site actually has, which is that you can do live in-play betting. And what that means is when you watch the game, so say you watch the stream embedded, as rounds go by, each round it offers you sort of like a unique bet, which I'm not sure how they figure out. Presumably it's off some sort of algorithm. And the reason why it's quite interesting actually is because technically it's not like a casino game. They can't rig it because basically the question will be like, 4 rounds from now, will the first kill in the round be an AK kill? And since the game's live, technically they have no clue whether that's going to happen. Now, they must have some sort of advanced algorithm that figures out what's like a reasonable bet and therefore what the odds are, etc. But it's an interesting feature, is what I'm saying. So anyone who actually does claim some sort of psychic powers, I mean, I'd hate to break it to you, but you already could have made millions on betting since you have psychic powers. But if you have incredibly psychic powers, you can now bet round to round,
That's so cool, Duncan.
That's
not bad,
right?
That's
not
really
a bad feature,
awesome.
is it? Yeah. It's not. I mean, obviously, I could just take that 5 minutes and then be like, here's 5 more minutes with Esportspools. And how do you structure your gambling website? And then 5 more minutes with Esportspools. So what's the history of the gambling website? 5 more minutes. What do you do when someone wins big? 5 more minutes. It's like, Moses, is this just a 50-minute interview divided up into 10 episodes? Yes. Okay, right. I think, it's weird. There is something wrong with me, Moses. I just can't take even the slightest bit of comment. I have to go straight personal, like straight into like...
Yeah, no, you just go right for the jugular, don't you?
Let's look what I've got in my dossier for you, Moses. Right, anyway, moving around. Moses, usual co-host there, along with me, Thorin, the co-host. Esports Journalist of the Year. And, well, just officially elected representative of esports to the mainstream. And everything I do and say represents every single one of you. And basically, anything I do that you consider ethically untenable, you've committed that crime as well.
It's going really well. Also, Duncan.
I'd make some sort of assassination joke there, but if I do too many of those, it'll just happen eventually, won't it? And then I can't even really be like, well, that's unfair, is it? It's like, yeah, brought it on myself, didn't I? But enough of the name of my biography, brought it on myself, didn't I? Moses here, my old mate, reminding me every time I see him that there's a new Noel Gallagher album out called Who Built the Moon? Right, anyway, enough of that. So, the guests for this episode, just lowbrow humour as always,
self-indulgent as well. Self-indulgent as always.
I know. The sad thing is, if no one knows who that is, there's no help, is there? It was the main writer of Oasis, okay? In the bottom right-hand box is Max Melit. He was on an episode in the past. One of those ones where I get, 2 people on that no one knows, and I think, well, half a person you know, plus another half a person you know, is sort of like someone you know, and they go, no, it isn't. It's still 2 people I don't know. And you go, well, they might make some really good points. And then another problem I've realised, here's the problem. My conception was, if you get 2 people on who haven't done a show before, it kind of hedges your bets, If one of them just doesn't talk for a period of time, or one of them just gets nervous, the other one can take over. It can also go worse than that, because I've realized it can also become like an interview type environment where both people get progressively more nervous because both of them are in that scenario. Then they feel like they're competing. They don't know, should I agree with what the person's saying? Should I disagree? If you learn anything about this show, just say your own opinion. Don't ever worry about what other people think.
It also leaves you plenty of room for a 15-minute introduction.
It does, yes. Only up to 3 so far, so still got a solid 10 plus to go. The final man in this chat, Launders. Now, one of the things that Launders has as a skill, right, is he can read the nuance and the detail of something that happens to a level that is, some would say, almost beggars belief. If Stewie2K was walking along, right, and someone, knocked a pencil off a table, and Stewie2K, dropped down and caught it, Launders could slow-mo that. He'd be in his mind, he's thinking now, when I duck down to grab the pencil, is someone going to kick me from the side? So I'm moving onto my right shin, loading up weight, but knowing at any point in time I need to spring backwards, arm reaches out, and basically that's why he's a genius. My friend, Stewie2K, P.S. Love you, man. PPS, automatic, do you want to be in the next episode? Again, incredibly self-indulgent. You basically have to know the one video that I'm referring to, otherwise none of that means anything. But now you know Launders is here. Formerly of Yahoo Esports. Currently, what are you currently of?
Boxer. Team Boxer.
Still in that? Still doing
Team
that?
Boxer.
Yes.
And I think it's really good for my ego that I don't understand sarcasm. So thank you, Duncan.
Okay.
I appreciate
don't worry
that.
Don't worry about it. Listen, at least you didn't get angry about it. At least you just, you took it on the chin. the name of someone else's biography. We'll leave it at that, right? So let's start the episode 46. Now, we had an interesting broad topic we want to start with for this one, which has so many ways you can go with this. I'm not going to try and structure it. We'll just see where it goes. The topic is this, right? What qualities actually make up an elite team? And when we say elite, one of the reasons, by the way, is as a very small sidebar as to why I actually kind of hate the term top tier or tier 1 is because actually most people, I realize this talking to someone outside of Counter-Strike, don't actually use the term correctly in Counter-Strike. Like, to everyone in Counter-Strike, for some reason, tier 1 means like the top 10 roughly or something along those lines. But in every other game where they use tier lists, etc., tier 1 means like top 3 teams, or, you know, like the teams that will win the tournament, like the elite teams, which is why I've personally myself always used the term elite teams for that. I usually mean like world-class team, like legitimately could win this big tournament, can probably beat most of the other teams. That's like kind of the rough criteria I have. So the reason I'm making this point clear at this point in time is when we say elite teams, yeah, we're not talking about North, for example. Like, yeah, a good team, but rarely have broken through, have rarely run tournaments. We're not talking generally about Gambit, for example, where they had the one big win, but generally you look at them, they weren't going to win most of the times. We're talking about FaZe, SK, Astralis when they have their full lineup. I think probably those 3 teams, like, I think even G2's borderline at this point in time, because if anything, their inconsistency is that they win or they do nothing. You know, they don't even do the consistent top 4. So generally, we're talking about these 3 teams now. And if we want to use any historical examples, obviously you can go through all of history. The Virtus Pros of the world, the NIPs, SK Gaming, Fnatic. There's a lot of teams throughout history. So now that the tone is set, I think there's a lot of places you can go in this. There's a lot of subjective aspects. So let's start now. At the moment, I've just listed off who might be the elite teams right now. Where would you start us, Max? What qualities or what quality initially jumps out to you that is something that the elite teams share or is a key component of them?
Well, you touched on how like G2 is sort of borderline, right? And I think a big element of why we don't consider them elite is because that element of consistency. I think consistency is just probably, especially in times when like the tier 2 or, you know, the sort of the bottom order of the top 10 is so like unsteady and tumultuous and can like all those teams can trade series off each other's and trade best of ones really easily. I think to be elite in that sense, you have to really, really idolize consistency, and you have to have, when you're talking about someone like SK, their star being like coldzera, who's just the most consistent player ever, right? You got to have that consistent bedrock that consistently can get you to those top 4s, to those grand finals, and can, even if the rest of the team falls apart around them, you have that one player you can look to push you through in those big series. And we saw that with coldzera throughout the SK sort of decline with Phelps. He was the guy that, yeah.
Okay, essentially, I would probably rephrase that as basically, I would just say it like this. I think you just have to like one of the factors you must have to be like a really elite team and have this consistency is I think you've got to have a superstar player, not just a good player, but you've got to have, because here's the thing, part of being a superstar usually is being consistent. You know, you can't be up and down and have 3 bad tournaments. It probably means you aren't a superstar. So if you look at the top 3 teams at the moment, coldzera, Nico, Device, like it doesn't really matter almost where these teams place. These players are going to give you their numbers pretty much every tournament. They're very consistent players, and that's a great starting place because now someone else in the team can have a lesser performance, but perhaps someone else only has to make up for it a little bit. You know, you still got the superstar guy there. You've always got that base that you can play the team around. A lot of these teams are designed around these players. You know, I think that would be a good way to phrase it. What do you think, Launders?
Yeah, so I think that that makes a lot of sense, because if you try to argue that an elite tier team is based on like these certain, just one quality or the other, whether it's results or just like a certain type of player, I don't think that paints the picture properly. Sure. I think that you do have to have a superstar consistent fragger, because I think if one thing leads to the other, like if how good your players leads to results, and we see like a consistent performance come out from a player like Cold, Device, Nico on Astralis, FaZe, and SK, then you can kind of understand, I think, better in a more complete way why they're elite tier and why a team like North isn't, even though they have like really, really good players. Well,
it makes more sense that obviously the in-game leader in theory will have identified this and will be like, this is our guy. We're going to, build a lot of the game around him. Whether that means in some cases give them freedom, like with someone like Nico, or in case of Cold Zera, he's going to play this particular aspect and someone else is going to do something else, you know? I think it makes logical sense because actually, I think a great way to contrast this, whether you're talking about now or in history, is to use the teams that were like very close. So for example, the two obvious teams at the moment is North and G2, and they both have their own issues, right? Because for example, in North, if anything, the thing they'd suffered for a long time was they never had the superstar. Like they had the players who were like, just, you know, maybe Megas and Config last year were going to break through. They didn't quite. You could make a case Config's gotten there now, but does the team suit them as well? I don't know. These are things for you guys to answer, so jump in someone.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
No, take it away.
Just gives up instantly. He just hears a breath come in. I see two lost Moses.
Spoken yet. I'm Canadian. I want to give him a chance. But yeah, so like North, for example, has Config, who I think does have the ability to be a superstar player. I think at some point, you know, people were talking about, like I think Sam was talking about moving him from North to Astralis for Kirby. Like Kirby's gotten a little bit better, but he's had kind of a decline, and so that was a conversation that was like a realistic possibility. He might be like a superstar consistent player, and then you have Valda, and then you have kind of a question mark. Whereas like SK, you have Cold for Fallen, Astralis, you have Device, Dupree, Zipix even more consistent I think than ever. Nico, Guardian, Olaf, like an amazing big three. But on North, you have that superstar player, but just not like the two next players, maybe Valda, but then, you know, I think you need more than that.
So is that another quality then? Like for example, obviously in this case, in the case of G2 and North, in theory they have the superstar player. You have Kenny S, you have Config, but as you've said, you know, one factor alone isn't going to account for it. So what beyond that do you need then?
Yeah, so like one like 90 to 100 ADR per tournament player that always shows up, and then two kind of flex stars that even on FaZe, for example, if you put Guardian Olaf as like the core, you have Rain, who's been more consistent than either Guardian or Olaf in some areas and some maps and stuff like that, and been more important at times. So, you know, it goes beyond even those three players to be elite tier, obviously, because it's a 5-player game. Yes. But, you know, you got to leave room for the IGL because the idea behind an IGL is they take a backseat on fragging. And sometimes Fallen is the most important player on his team, but sometimes take a backseat on fragging so that the other players are much better than they would be without him.
Yes.
I think this conversation focuses too much on like the individuals and the players and the role. I mean, if we're talking for an elite team, I think you have to look at the whole package. And for me, if I'm thinking an elite team, and if we're gonna you know, put up criteria that condense it down to 2 or 3 teams, I think that the mark of an elite team is your ability to win series and win events when your plan A fails, like when your main success fails. So for someone, you know, for instance, if you're a tactical team and you're very, very good at tactics, you're very good at anti-stratting, if that fails, do you have the individuals to overcome it? If you're an individually based team and you have players who are having an off game, or you're normally the superstars that you guys are mentioning, if these guys are having off games, is your team able to win a series? Are they able to move on in the tournament when they have bad series? Because that's what makes a team truly, truly godlike. And this is where you see a team like SK. Like if I'm gonna go off that kind of criterion, you know, I've always, for elite teams, I would put SK in it for sure. I think Astralis is an elite team, but they're really like riding the edge. And I wouldn't even put FaZe. I would not put FaZe as an elite team with that kind of criteria, because FaZe still hasn't proved. Yes, they are an incredible team. They have so much talent and they have players who can dominate, but they still haven't shown that they have some kind of tactical foundation to fall back on when they have players like Nico and Olaf Meister and Guardian struggling, when they have, you know, these guys have off games, they haven't shown consistently that they're able to overcome it. Yes, they have plenty of people to take up the space, but you know, one thing that worries me about FaZe at the moment, which we can get into later to not stray too far away, is I'm wondering when the conversation around Kerrigan is going to shift from being one of the best in-game leaders to the fact that I think he's the best honeymoon in-game leader. I think he's a leader who is phenomenal on a team for 2 to 3 months, and then he drops off. But I mean, to go back, that's kind of why I wouldn't put FaZe in there. And in that kind of idea, I think Astralis is riding a line. I think if you look at Astralis at Blast, one of the things that they sorely miss, and I've been saying this for a long time, and that just kind of reinforced my own thoughts to me, is that they didn't have anyone who would make a play. They didn't seem to have an individual who wanted to take over the game. And I think that was the biggest benefit of them playing with Dennis, was someone who didn't necessarily give a fuck and try and fit into the system that they wanted to be in. You saw Dennis making plays on that team at Blast Pro Series that not even Device would have never made, Dupree would have never made, if it weren't for, the fact that they had this kind of stand-in for this one tournament. And you saw everyone kind of relax a little bit and stop trying to fit into this structured system and have very, very good performances. So, like I said, SK is up there for sure. They can win tactically, they can win individually. Astralis is still up there, but barely. And FaZe still needs to figure some things out. That team kind of worries me if they're going to drop off over the next couple months.
I have the same concerns. I actually had a question for... Yeah, go ahead.
There you go. Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to touch on the idea about... Oh, sorry.
Is this a fucking act?
Well, no, you said you go, and then I was like, okay. I'll just go in. So, touching on the point about the fact you need to be able to fall back onto something more than your plan A, and that you need to have this consistent fragging base, and you need to have the superstar. And I think that's why we don't see G2 as an elite team per se, because I don't know if you guys read the interview with MBK where on I think it was after, was it IM Oakland, where he talked about how they need more structure, they need to clearly define roles, they need to create artificial team play so that if someone like Kenny isn't having a good game, or if they aren't on one of their good maps and their sort of Shox is calling us off, they can have this fundamental base of artificially created team play, whatever sort of that means, to fall back on. And I think that's just tying into Moses' point. But sorry for interrupting, Lawrence, as you go.
Please, no apologies. So I was going to ask Moses, you mentioned that the team could be individualistic. Can you be individualistic and elite tier? Now, I know you just mentioned that maybe the problem for FaZe is that they're not quite elite tier because they're too individualistic. Do you think there's room for a team to be to be run like a team like Kerrigan wants to run a team, or do you think you need to be more towards if you put FaZe and Astralis together, you get SK kind of thing? Is that what they're both missing?
You could definitely be an elite team and have the more individual play style. We saw it out of Fnatic. They were definitely an elite team that always found a way to win, even when they had someone kind of failing at certain points during the run during 2015, early 2016. The problem is, and Kerrigan said it in an interview pretty early on, we need to find some way to have some kind of a tactical base that we can go to when things are struggling or when things are failing. And they haven't been able to establish it to my eyes. I haven't seen them really kind of find that balance or that kind of fallback. So they definitely can. I think if you look at G2 as well, they're another team that can be elite, and they have still that individualistic play style, but we've seen how high they can get. It comes down to consistency as well, which is what Max is touching on, and that's kind of what makes you an elite, is when you can reach that peak on a consistent basis, like when you have multiple different ways and options of winning, when you have that other thing to go to that's not just Kenny makes a sick play with the AWP, or Apex is on fire for a tournament or a series.
Here's the way I think I would tie that together is when you say that, definitely by the criteria you laid out, I can understand why you say FaZe isn't elite. I actually think given time, either they'll develop this or they'll just prove to be anyway, because here's the bizarre thing, right? Each of those three teams in a way is a bit one-dimensional. They kind of, as you're saying, they have a plan A, and the plan A could definitely do a lot. I would say FaZe and G2's plan A is fucking unreal. The problem with the G2 one is it doesn't happen that often. And the FaZe one, I would argue FaZe might end up having the most ridiculous plan A ever, because obviously they can win events straight up off that. Win all the pistols, get your good maps that everyone plays, 2 of your players go off. That's going to be a bunch of series wins and a bunch of map wins and probably tournaments, I agree right now at the moment they probably do have a big issue in that. If they don't win pistols and they don't get these massive CT halves, they have a lot of problems. And you see, for example, when you go to the G2 example, their problem is they have the great ceiling, and the peak and the consistency rather is a fucking joke. The consistency can be don't even get out of groups, which is something which is very rare for a team that can actually straight win the tournament. And I actually think North is the most easiest one to diagnose, which is their problem is really good average level. No real ceiling though. The average level to the top ceiling isn't that high for them. So their problem is because they already have the tactics, they already have the whole system in place, they already have all the roles set for everyone. They have good players, maybe not quite good enough players, And then also, unfortunately, I think it's just been a hallmark of MSL's career that he just has this one style he wants to call. He's just one of those guys where you see it in traditional sports, there's like famously in basketball, okay, Mike D'Antoni would only run that one basketball system, the 7 seconds or less, where you push the ball fast, and if you have a great point guard and you have all these great shooters, you have a style with which you can win, but you can't win if it's a grind out half court game. You can't win if a certain player goes down. There's all these factors that, again, as we're kind of talking about, elite teams can overcome some of these factors and sometimes win when it's not your best day. Maybe you weren't the best team in the tournament.
Yeah, not even just elite teams, right? Like say a team only executes at 30 seconds, well then you just hold your grenades. So you know that they're always like feigning for map control. If they don't push too hard, you just are very reserved about your grenades because you know that they're never going to execute at 45. So if a team does think that like that's how they want to play every round out, or they play too slowly in general, then all you have to do is ensure that they're comfortable playing that style at the beginning of the match, and then just adapt to that one thing for the rest of it. So I think that,
which is why the Astralis phase rivalry was so cool to watch, because it's just like, okay, if Astralis are constantly going for this execute driven style, but you can't really consistently do that in like these 3 best of 3s against someone like Carrigan who can read and adjust really quickly to a style like that. It's like, all right, well then who's going to be the guy, as Moses was saying before, from Astralis, who's going to step up and make that crazy volatile play? And especially when you have like the Kirby Dupree combo not falling as well, sort of failing alongside not being able to fall back onto a plan B.
I will say that this kind of take on being an elite team is like from like the through the lens of like a theoretical Counter-Strike fan. I don't know if it's really an effective one to as like a commentator of the scene, because obviously a phase goes on to win like 3 events with an individual style. Like at a certain point, I almost feel like you just kind of have to put them in that kind of elite category because
obviously
they're winning everything. So I mean, there is kind of that caveat to it.
Okay, I'll put it this way. Okay, Moses. Okay, there's a famous thing that everyone criticizes Charles Barkley, the Hall of Fame NBA player, for what he does inside the NBA, which is that unfortunately
never won a championship.
He would no. I mean, in terms of his analysis, which is that he had a very famous line he always said, which was actually traditional wisdom in basketball, which is that jump shooting teams never win the championship. Because if you ever had teams like the Suns teams, etc., basically traditionally they'd always be very good, but they'd lose like in the Western Conference final, or they'd lose to some defensive team in the final, because famously that's like the one constant you can often have in basketball, is having very good defense. And obviously, because Golden State won 2 of the last 3 championships and lost the other one in Game 7, everyone now is like, haha, Charles Barkley, you idiot, you don't know anything. But the point I'm making here is, right, Golden State is the most extreme ever example of that sort of a team. Like, basically, you can't even construct a team like Golden State. Like, they got lucky with draft picks, for example, and then those 2 draft picks turned out to be the best shooters of all time. Then they got, like, an amazing player in free agency who normally wouldn't just go to a top team like that. You'd normally pick a team where you're the number 1 player and you're not going to give up any kind of star power. So basically, in a mad way, it's actually not a very good criticism of Charles Barkley, because basically you've picked the one exception in history that went counter to his logic. So the principle still holds, actually. He was pretty correct if you knew the nuance of it. Well, I actually think in this sense, I wouldn't criticize you if FaZe went on to win the next 3 tournaments, because for most teams in history who were that sort of an all-star lineup, you're right, they wouldn't be the best team. And the fact they wouldn't have a plan B means they couldn't be an elite team. They'd be more like a G2, they'd have an amazing tournament, they'd have a shit tournament, they're amazing, So even if it happens, I would say it's the exception, Like I've always said this about this new FaZe lineup. If they can really win all these tournaments and they can do it in undefeated fashion, then I have to just tip my hat and be like, fair enough, they've done a new thing that no one's done before, right? It's not that everything we knew about Counter-Strike goes out the window. They have put together a team that should not exist almost, So maybe it is possible to do new things. Maybe you can win a tournament just by winning every pistol round. A normal team can't, because you can't rely on winning a pistol round, but I get maybe you can if you've got those players, right?
It is unreal. Yeah, I mean, it's just, if their plan A goes well, it's just like it almost feels like it's just over, doesn't it? Like if everyone's kind of hitting their shots, if everyone's in sync, that's a scary team.
I like the question of, can we define what an elite tier team is, because it spawns other conversations. Like, for the sake of just defining what the word is, I don't think it actually does much for us, because we know who the best teams are, who's most likely to win the tournament. That doesn't really change anything. But the question is interesting, because there's like in Melee, for example, there's this thing of like the 5 gods, and there's like the top 5 players, and they never lose to players outside the top 5. So that was like a qualification for them, right? And that's kind of an interesting thing. Like, FaZe have placed top 3, I think, at every tournament they've played so far, top 3 or better. They also, I think, have only.
I mean, when he says that, he means like in terms of hyperbole. You have to understand, Melee's a bit like CS:GO and Dota. There's a million tournaments. So obviously, these players have lost to, like, for example, they've all lost to Leffen, you know. But in general, typically, you know, they're only going to lose because they're so good to the other really sick players, and that I think that's a pretty good criteria as well, right? Like typically. I mean, think about when Astralis was in there, like solid 6 months or so, where they were very good. The only teams that were going to beat them were a Virtus Pro or a FaZe or whoever, SK, whoever the other really, really good teams were. And even then, it was going to be 3 maps, so it was going to be very, very tough series, you know. Which, yeah, that's kind of a hallmark again of consistency and being elite, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like even if you knew nothing about Counter-Strike, would it be fair to say because a team only loses to a top 5 team that they are basically an elite tier team if your elite tier is the top 5?
Yes.
So I think that's
there's also no there's also like no hard and fast. There can only be like 3 teams in the elite. Like it's obviously if G2 become this crazy consistent team and this like more structured style they're pushing starts to work and their tactics become better and they can consistently trade maps with FaZe, Astralis and SK, and then this, you know, top 4 can emerge. It's just about the teams that are like clearly heads and shoulders above the rest of the scene and above the rest of the top 10. And then you can also tie in that whole idea of there being a gatekeeper team who like occasionally scores upsets from the elite, but then consistently beats everyone below them. So yeah, there's some
NIP, baby.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is that actually that's one of the reasons also why I like the term elite in that sense, where it's not a set number of teams, you know, because obviously there are periods in time where you get 1 or 2 amazing teams that are so much better, but then you have times where it's awesome and there's 4 top teams, you know, like I think like late 2015 there was like 4 teams that all could have won the events and they had that weird sort of like A beats B beats C beats D, you know, one of those like scenarios where it's all about the matchup as to who's going to win. Okay, I think another quality though to tie in, because I was trying to think when Moses was doing the point about Carrigan, and then I was thinking about like, for example, MSL. And I actually think another aspect that tends to make up the teams that are the elite teams is you don't have to be the best in-game leader. Like, I think if you go back in history, I could have made a pretty solid case that, like, Pronax wasn't the best player in 2015 in Fnatic. But I think a key aspect I would say is either you have to be the best in-game leader for this team that you have, or another way of saying that is you have to basically be able to make the team play your style. Because, for example, no matter how much you want to critique Happy as an in-game leader, when you look at the teams that won the majors, they absolutely did play to all of his strengths of his style. He was in complete control of all these elements. And so while that worked and he had the right players, absolutely he was a good in-game leader. And therefore, I think it was one of the things that helped make his team very good.
Yeah, I mean, you as an in-game leader, I like it. I mean, the tough part is it's really hard to judge if you're going to be the best in-game leader for your team at that one point in time, right? Like, obviously you have to get them to buy into your system. But for instance, like, I mean, it's too hard to kind of judge if someone else would have done a better job, but I think you have to prove that you're like the best in one area of in-game leading, right? Like, for instance, Pronax maybe was not the best in-game leader. In fact, as time went on, we saw him lose control of that team. Even when they were winning, they kind of went away from, you know, the reports were that there was a rift between how he wanted to play and how everyone wanted to. But one thing he was always good at was he was the best in-game leader at making the mid-round decisions, of knowing where the next place to go was. That his mid-round calls were incredible. So it's really, really important to have that. Obviously, Fallen is legendary for setting up that system in the original Brazilian lineups when they were on the rise. That kind of threw everyone to hell. The Na'Vi teams that had like Starix and Zeus, the executions, the discipline of running down the time, like they were the best in-game leaders at that style.
Well, put it this way though, Moses, like to contrast what you were saying there, like to clarify a little bit more though. So I'll give you an example. If you go and you look, for example, at G2 right now, I think this is a perfect example of a team that doesn't actually fit their in-game leader, because it doesn't make a lot of sense that your in-game leader is a guy who wants to play low econ when your best player is the AWPer. You know, actually, what's in a mad way, I almost feel like that team should have like, well, just pick another really good Scream instead of Kenny S, and maybe it would actually work better for whatever Shox thinks of as his in-game leader style. You know, you do get those teams where. He might be
MBK calling. I think MBK is calling on CT side and Shox is calling on T side. I think from memory.
But the point anyway is that, like, that you do get these weird teams where from the outside you're like, why does he do that style? But that's because that's always the dilemma, right? Most in-game leaders want you to adapt to their style. There's not that many of them actually that'll come in and be like, what have I got here? How am I going to construct a style?
Well, is it almost fair to say that like your point would be like you have to have an in-game leader that's able to establish an identity for how your team wants to play? Because like for instance, when I look at G2, I don't see an identity to how they want to play T side. Like I don't think force buying and consistent questionable economic decisions is an identity. But if you're Fnatic, obviously the mid-round playmaking was what identified that team, their ability to turn the tides. SK was their ability to always have an option in a round. They always had an escape route. They always had, everyone had their kind of job to play in that round. This Astralis is a map control style that has been set up by Glaive that's very, very effective. So every one of these teams that we kind of talk about as one of the best of their era has always had some kind of style to their T side that they were the best at. Even the old Navi team that was, seemed like they were poised to win a major at some point was, they're just going to run out the clock and clinically execute. They're just an unstoppable machine in that kind of way. So yeah, I mean, I think we just kind of argued to the same point. But every team that has been considered elite at some point in the past has had some identifying play style for sure.
I want to say something that might be a bold statement, but I think that SK are like the one team.
I love this guy. Like, how I do it, Launders? I just skip that first sentence and I say the bold statement. I don't go, everyone, I'd just like to warn you all, I'm about to say something a little cray. Right, come on, hit us with it, come on.
All right. Well,
I'm ready now.
So if we talk about these teams, we can go through the list and see a flaw in one team and a flaw in the other. I don't think that we can find one in SK or their system, in the sense that they know when to play fast, they know when to play slow, they have a plan for every single situation. They have the best consistent fraggers. They have an IGL that's also like one of the best players sometimes. So they don't have that as a weakness. And every other team, in my opinion, just aspires to be SK in the sense that they're kind of the perfect team right now.
Their only weakness is that the map D Inferno exists and they already have a permaban that's called Nuke. I think that's probably the only one you could come up with pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually something I didn't even.
That's really about it, though. It's just one map.
Okay. Go on, Max. No,
the secret is not to be polite.
You got like three nicest guys.
You have an Australian and Canadian here. Yeah. I was going to say the thing about SK that's crazy as well is that like every single player is just so aware what like he needs to do in each situation, and it's just and I think that's also why like it can sometimes feel like people give Fallen like too much credit in a way, just because you look at all these scenarios and everyone is just making like such fun bar Phelps. Like we don't need to talk about Phelps, but like everyone just seems to make like a decision in a round that just seems to be just so correct, like relative to their skill set and relative to what SK needs. And that might not necessarily be like full and micromanaging the players, but it's just this intuitive sense of what each player needs to do within the SK system, the unified goal of what they need to achieve, and just like this confidence in that system. Like when we watch someone like Fur play, it's not necessarily even like a super like brash confidence. It's just like he realizes that he needs to be this aggressive playmaking force on some maps like Overpass, where it's like, all right, well, you have this system geared towards your skill set to make things happen at a round party. Let's make it happen. And he does that, and he has the confidence to do that. And you see some of the most ridiculous rounds ever from him in those scenarios.
I mean, to put that a different way, because I think if you watch a game from SK's point of view and you went through every single player, you could obviously find multiple mistakes that the players make. Probably a couple per round, I would say, just because it happens in Counter-Strike at all times. I think one thing that a team like SK has, and I mean that's unavoidable. I think every team makes multiple mistakes per round, but one thing that SK has, that Astralis has it as well, and very few other teams outside of that, is that the players, one thing they always do right is that they always make the decision to like work as a team. Like when I cast games as SK and Astralis, I am never there saying, why are they playing so individual? Why are they taking all these individual battles? Why are all these rounds based off individuals? So no matter what situation you're in, you can never always make the right call or the right decision or the right play. But the big thing is they have so much trust in each other as teammates that they're always doing the wrong thing together, which if you're going to do something wrong, that's the best fucking way to do it.
Yeah, there's actually a great saying that they had in League of Legends when people first were discovering the concept of a shot caller. And the way they used to sell people on it is they would say, I think it's actually a phrase from something else, but I just know that they used it in League. They would say, because it's a 5-man game, it's actually better for 5 people to do the wrong thing than for 5 people to all do what they think is the right thing if it ends up being different for each person. It's a very good saying, actually, because you can make something work still with team play, even if it's not the perfect strategy, right?
Yeah, it sounded a little crazy at first, but yeah, like I always tell like my lower level teams, just like, you know, we can do the wrong thing, but a lot of strats can work on the round. But if we all don't agree on one, then none of them are going to work. Yeah. So you can chase 2 rabbits, right? But another. I don't know if we're gonna veer away from this topic, but like one thing that I hate about I guess not just esports or Counter-Strike, but just like when we're looking at what impact an IGL has, because Max was just talking about how much credit you can give to him. It's like, we don't know how much credit you can give to an IGL for like how their team plays, in the sense that like Sam just did an article or an interview with MSL, and MSL said it's really important to be able to trust your teammates to make individual plays to win the round for you. That's actually a red flag for me, because it feels like MSL just learned that or something, because it doesn't seem like his teams have ever played like that. So when you look at SK, they always have had the freedom, and then they also have the solid structure in the back.
But I think you also have to look at the context of MSL's career, in the sense that he's always had like the leftovers of the Danish scene. So in that sense, when like you're picking up people who have never played at the highest level, you're just like, I don't want you making individual decisions because you don't know what the fuck to do. So I will make every decision for you. I will have everything planned out to a T, and we'll win from that way. I think the big thing to realize that I think a lot of times it is always tough to quantify the level that an in-game leader affects a team. But the important thing is the in-game leader and the tactics aren't ever supposed to like win you rounds, right? They're supposed to put you in position to win the rounds. They're supposed to like get the bomb planted. They're supposed to put you in like a 2-on-2. And then from there, it's the individual decisions that are made in conjunction with your teammates that kind of close the round out. So, I mean, the sense that an in-game leader is going to be able to make every decision is insanity, especially in this point in Counter-Strike with the way the meta has developed, where we have so many good players that have to play independently in order to be effective. Like we just have those star players now.
Do you think that at North need a roster change?
I mean, it depends on what they're going for. If they want to be winning tournaments, yeah. I mean, if you
be a good team that makes money for their organization.
No, listen, I think North is a good team, and I think they can have some good runs where they place like into a top 4 and they get to like the semifinals. They maybe make a grand final here or there, but I don't think we're going to be seeing this lineup hoist a whole lot of trophies. I think the trouble with North, and maybe not trouble, but it's just kind of like the issue they have is they still don't have a whole lot of star power. Like if I go to HLTV right now, they're ranked number 7th. And if I look at North and I say, who is their superstar? There's Config. If I go to every other team above them, each team has at least 2 stars. Yes. And the thing is, like North brought in Valdi, who I think is one of the better players in the scene from a Counter-Strike theoretical point of view, because I love the way he plays. He's very fundamentally sound. He's very, very good in reading the game and reading each round. And the theory behind his decisions is very, very good. But either he needs to develop into a superstar, which is difficult to do from that kind of play style. Like the biggest superstar we have that plays that kind of play style is someone like Xyp9x. And we all know Xyp9x is going to be incredible, and he can carry some games with his clutches.
He's not going to put the same numbers up, though.
Yes, he's not going to be consistently the one driving and having those impact kills that open up rounds. He's more of a closer. So you need another superstar on that team, and either Valdi's got to develop into that, or AZ's got to find the level that we thought of him back in 2015, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen.
Well, especially if you add in, just as a final caveat, which goes without saying, is that they have a low fragging in-game leader themselves. So since MSL's not going to add a lot, I always say this, you can have an MSL or a God B or whoever it might, you can have Sean Gares, any of them, but if you have them, it's going to put more strain on the others to like deliver the load in that sense. You can't then have extra players, as obviously in the case of God B's team, he has too many of them already. He has himself and a couple of other people who are somewhat dead weight in terms of fragging, you know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, his stat, just to touch
be
on
a
that,
scoreboard analyst, but now we're trying to do the opposite thing.
You guys are really cute.
Is that chemistry?
Yeah,
all right. So wait, quick
I think
point.
it's the opposite of chemistry, but okay.
Chemistry, man.
When something explodes in chemistry. So just a quick thing. So for MSL is like a particularly bad fragging IGL, like the worst,
terrible. Like
the worst. So that could actually, I mean, at a certain point, it's not 4v5. You can't have someone, if someone has, like Taco had those couple of matches where he was like a 0.45 or something, or in the series. And you know, if you ask Taco, he will tell you that he played bad that series. Okay. Even if from the outside, it's a giant Reddit thread with 10K upvotes talking about all the things that he did right and how he got screwed over and shit. If you have point, like if you have 45 ADR in a series, that's a huge reason why your team lost. You're going to feel like you're the reason your team lost. Like that actually matters. And so if you're consistently pulling like below 0.7, that will mean that like your team, no matter how good your team is, you have to like contribute more. You're going to get fucked.
I also think on the MSL topic, because the problem is in the areas he's strong in, I think he's actually very good. And because his teams are never quite as good as his strengths, he probably ends up getting a little bit underrated sometimes. Like people act like the reason he doesn't win is because he's not a good in-game leader. I think he definitely is. Like, for example, tactically, I think he's one of the absolute best. I'd put him ahead of some of the guys we're talking about now. One of his problems, I have to say, and something I've always noticed with him, is he really is like the nerd in-game leader, where he just thinks, right, well, I gave you the tactics. That's the right tactic. Why aren't we doing it and winning? He doesn't actually seem to understand at all the concept of, even though I'm not a big fan of like the idea of being like a rah-rah, like morale guy and stuff, he just doesn't get that at all. And so if you ever see his teams, I mean, you can attest to this, Moses, when you see a North team at an event, except for Config, who just has a natural confidence, they're not exactly, just even in terms of the way that the players talk, they never sound like they think they're going to win the tournament. Like Cage and B will be like, yeah, we'll see how it's going to be in this game. And Valde's just pretty young, but even then he'll be like, oh, I hope we do well. Like AZ just doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to, like, he doesn't seem like a guy where, the analogy I would give you is, in some sports, okay, if you're like the point guard or the quarterback or whatever, one of the ways you can actually like push your star players and players to develop and become better is you tell them like, listen, oh, you dropped the pass there, don't worry, like I'm going to put the next one right on the money. Like you can get this one actually, you didn't go for that one because you thought it was too far. You could have got to that, you sort of like build them up a bit and you make them believe, obviously in reasonable context, that they're a very good player, that they can do this. I feel like MSL thinks it's like a machine and he can just set the pieces in motion, press the button and go like, right, the machine should work now. I should win the game. And it's like, well, you lost 16-14 because someone didn't make a play they would have made here on a round because they didn't know that they could do it, or they were nervous in this situation and they thought they were going to fall back, whatever it might be. Like, I think that's one area where he's lacking. And obviously that might only be a small detail, but we're talking about elite teams here. These are the best teams in the whole world. It's not, can you be a good team? He's done that. Can you be the best team? That's the struggle for him, because I actually do think that his team's pretty good. I think they could get more out of it. It's just that I think they're also quite limited.
By the way, Astralis is pretty similar in their like demeanor as players. And I mean, they're a little bit better, but the one thing they have that's a big difference is, and people always criticize them for this, is fucking Zonic behind the team being like the massive cheerleader hype man. Like the players love that, and they need that. I mean, that's the kind of like energy that helps you build that. As a player, you kind of build that momentum. And I know momentum's always a touchy subject for competitive Counter-Strike, but you do. I
mean, it definitely ties into the psychological component, right? If players feel like they're on this big role, like actually, here's what's funny, Moses. I would even say that's an example where I could tie into it very quickly. Just say an MSL team in a bizarre way almost never has momentum, because what they do is if they like lose a key round, they'll grind back like one out of the next two, but that you never establish that psychological momentum. It's like, right, if our tactic works perfectly, we win the round. That works if you can execute, but if it doesn't, you can actually, they're the team where there is no plan B, right? We had plan A. We spent all our time working on it.
Yeah. The only other plan B they have is I mean, whatever you would like Config making some massive Herculean effort at the other side of the map or something like that. But either way, I mean, it's that kind of feeling where the idea to me of momentum is the fact that players just, when you start having successful rounds row in a row, players just generally feel better about themselves and feel more confident, and a lot of that pressure gets relieved. And then you could just see it in their play style, like the kinds of fights that they're taking, they're obviously feeling it. And if they keep winning those, that's momentum, because they're fights you normally wouldn't take if you were just been battered like 4 rounds in a row, and that's when teams get pretty scary. But yeah, no, I think North is a cool team to watch. It's just I don't see their ceiling as being very high.
Well, yeah, they've got FC Copenhagen. There's tons of money in not esports now. Just like
but I had a line like this, launders. Like money doesn't buy headshots.
But it can buy players that get headshots, right?
Okay, yeah, you're right. So you presumably you brought this up, right? Presumably, you think they should make a roster move if they can, right?
Oh fuck!
Yeah, there we go. He's got to play the bad guy now.
I don't. Well, the only problem is I don't know who they would get.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah. I mean, but I think it's just interesting that we are Moneyball now. Like we just seen, a team that should never have been possible. FaZe come into existence because of just endless amounts of money being poured into player buyouts, right? So, I mean,
to be fair, it can also go the other way. You can end up with Optic.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
that's a weird thing to me.
There's
like,
two sides to it, right?
Yeah. I wonder if they're going. I don't know. That was a weird thing to me because you're buying a team that you're putting in North America that has a collection of like really good players, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe they really did believe they could be a top 5 team, but I never thought that. I never thought they would. I think they would have a hard time breaking into top 10.
Yes,
to be honest, and for them to start in North American EPL. Well, I was actually super impressed halfway through the season with how much better I thought that they got than I thought they'd be. So there is that, but I thought that I just never. It just didn't seem like you look at how stacked the top 5 is. Like, you know, HS was saying that he thought they could break into that, and I'm just like, really? Like how?
He is young and naive, to be fair. You know, he's just a young lad. He's on his way up. You know, he thinks it's the beginning of the movie where it's like, oh, and then he's in the championship fight. Will he make it now? It's like, no, son, you won't. So.
Rose-colored glasses.
I haven't broken his spirit yet, but you know, I was wondering which would break first, HS. Your spirit or
also
that kid account?
Anyway, that kid is really good. And there's like a Loba's.
He's top 2 from Estonia, that's for sure.
Top 2 from Estonia. Who knows how much fucking talent that place has? But there was that Reddit post from that had a Steam message from Loba's. Like Steam was talking to HS, and HS was like all emo about his place on the team, and no one actually know if he was talking about that. But that's weird because when I've cast like all of EPL and ECS, so I've seen like all of Optic's matches, and he has been like super sick. I think he is super sick.
Well, his problem, of course, is that everyone else in the team has a more established name. So if you start talking about cutting people, like first of all, if you went statistically, you'd say just cut Freiburg tomorrow. But the whole point of Optic, really, the theme of Optic is this is supposed to be Freiburg's return, and he gets his own team without Nip, and oh look, he's going to turn it around. So no fan's going to be like, oh, just kill the main character of the movie. Let's just have some other character who's brand new take over.
Well,
I mean, No Country for Old Men was a really good movie.
So Freiburg is who in the movie?
Main character of the first half.
Okay. We won't give any spoilers.
I actually haven't seen that movie. Also, when you look at Optic, no one's going to be an in-game leader on that.
Did you ever watch the porn version? No cunt tree for bald men. I believe you could have actually started it. I just made that up, by the way. It wasn't bad, though, was it?
My
it was decent.
God.
Right off the top of your head.
We need that. Did we need that? He was getting right into it.
Come on, get back into it.
You know there's always going to be a ball joke somewhere. Esports is a very lowbrow community. No, I was just going to say, if you
very
look at
highbrow individual, but okay.
no one wants to be an in-game leader on that team. Mixwell, HS, Magisk, and Alu, like none of them are going to be an in-game leader. There's no chance. By the way, there's a very small chance Freiburg will be able to be a successful in-game leader, but he's certainly higher up than those other 4.
I like the way they've already invoked the fucking the Rolodex of excuses. Like, right, well, we've got to buy some time. Say that Mixwell's going to be an Opera again for 2 months.
That was a red flag, wasn't that scary to read that? Like,
it's lovely, isn't it?
Just like a window into turmoil.
I'm so sick of that. I'm so
sick. Cancer, isn't it?
It's just tilting me at this point. I remember when that debate happened on the original Optic, like last year, right after New York, right after they had like their best performance ever up to that point.
Yes.
And Mixwell was just like, I don't really feel like opping anymore. Then he wanted to be the second. It just goes back and forth too much.
Okay. What were you going to say, Max?
Oh, I was just going to say the whole sort of hope for Optic is that Armapet would be able to like try and like guide the lack of leadership with his wizardry as a coach and being the demo grinder and providing that like tactical structure and the really solid macro foundation for a side that doesn't have a strong leader. But clearly that hasn't happened really.
Here's the problem with that kind of idea as I'm a pet as like this godsend of an analyst. And by the way, from every single player I've talked to, he's phenomenal in what he provides a team. But to have that kind of an impact, to have like the impact as like the in-game leader would have, or like a strong personnel on a team would have from the analyst position, where you don't get to talk in the rounds and you don't get to actually have that, is you need to be able to establish that during practice. You need to be able to harp on them enough during practice. And when you look at the 4 people, as Duncan said, like the name power of that team, Are they going to give him enough respect when he says, no, you're doing it the wrong way? This is what you need to be doing. This is what we need to work on. Stop fucking it up. Pay attention. Like, play the right way. Because as a new team, you need to have that level of discipline. If you're ever going to get to the high level, you need to have this massive level of discipline to where everyone's focused and everyone's fixing their mistakes and everyone's communicating. And are they going to give someone like I'm a Pet? Do they have that? And like that ability to respect him enough to kind of change their ways if he notices something wrong? And I've had this conversation with a number of people because they don't seem to have a strong personality on their team, even outside of Chet, who I don't think would be that strong personality to begin with. I think the only person who would be it is Freiberg, and that's like if he goes like Hulk mode, because Freiberg is like the nicest guy ever. So he would have to like get legit, seriously like pissed off and be able to establish that. So that's like, to do that as an analyst is a very, very difficult thing to do, especially if you don't have the name power that like Zeus has. Like Zeus is going to get all the respect in the world from Team Liquid.
Yeah. And he's much bigger than them. So when he's just standing there with his commanding voice, and you're physically intimidated, and that might help out. And
meanwhile, I'm a pet. You're like, listen, mate, you'll be hanging out with a fucking locker if you talk to me again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the pedigree is important, I think, for coaches, just because. And I think we'll see like a new round of like really good coaches come when top tier CSGO professionals retire, and they can give their input, and it's like hard to just tell them no. You just believe them beyond the point of like your own doubt. And like I think that is going to be a pain point for I'm a Pet, who just can't say like I know that this works. You can't say for sure.
That's the key thing. Like I always said this in the past. Like it's true. I totally get, by the way, why even if they have to play on a lower level, Sean Gares and Existence just continue. God B refuse to give up, because the thing is, they still think that there's an outside chance that they could have like a run of glory and they could get the thrill of being a competitor. And you also make pretty good money. And they actually, at the moment, in a game where you can't coach very much beyond timeouts, at the moment, you still have better job security actually as the in-game leader. Because like in those teams, you can't remove those players. They are the team, But one day, let's say it's not even that far, 2 years, 3 years from now, at least one of these guys is going to retire. And if CS still continues on the trajectory it is now, I don't think they're going to turn down a gig where it's like, if like Envious comes to them, I'll pay you 10 grand a month to be the coach. I think some of these guys will actually start taking it up, and that's where you'll see the real transition, Because at the moment, we've got like a few X-Pros, but you notice they're mainly the X1.6 pros who didn't really play CSGO, There's not really the proper coaches, because they're either at the moment the I'm a Pet analyst guys who definitely have their own role, or they're the old school guys who are more like, well, from my experiences, what you do, There isn't really the proper guy who like there's not the dream coach at the moment, basically.
So with the coaching revolution on the horizon, Duncan, does this mean that a team like FaZe could work with an IGL like Kerrigan with a better coach at the helm that maybe just had like more experience that could give him more perspective on like a wider range of ways to play the game?
I still think actually FaZe, here's the thing with FaZe. One of the reasons I haven't written them off is because they still have been together a relatively short amount of time. I think now it's probably about, let me think, probably about 3 months now. I think 3 months. So I'll admit they haven't got long before I'll just go ahead and say this is who they are. Like they're not going to improve much more. But I will say, like every other superstar type team like that, like the Fnatic team Moses referenced, they did, as I've mentioned in a past episode, actually kind of get to cheat because they had the existing team play of 4 of them for the year and a half before they went into the free-for-all mode and just Fnatic things and all that stuff. They didn't have to just start from day one with superstar players and be like, how do we play and who's doing what, Like, FaZe obviously had a very, very chaotic first couple of tournaments figuring shit out. Like, amazingly, I think I've referenced this on, I can't remember what show it was on, but actually, Guardian, even during their E-League Premier win, was still saying on Twitter, like even to me, like, oh, everyone should like calm down, saying we're the best team, like we're not necessarily even going to win this tournament. Like you'd be surprised, considering in game it looked amazing. That's like a red flag that they know. Like, well, I also know what happens in practice when we lose both pistols and when we get a bad CT half, and then the force buy goes wrong, and then we have no money. And I think that was him sort of, funnily enough, hinting at what happens at an Epicenter or in the final against Nip on those 3 maps. He could kind of see that. Yeah, it's going great right now, but it's not always going to be, the ball doesn't always break your way in that particular sense, So I do think that could help, because I agree with Moses in a sense. Like, it's not necessarily even a knock. I just think Carrigan's, one of his strengths is he's amazing at making a team work like overnight. Like, you could just throw it. If you gave him the Optic, 4 of the Optic players, I bet you he could make them like 7th best team in the world. I bet he could do it. Like, he's that good.
No.
Yeah, right.
No way.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I see your point though. Like Karrigan is a solid, super solid IGL, super solid IGL, super solid individual player. Yeah, I think he has like a nervousness because he's had had some of the best clutches like ever. Like he's gotten so close to having some of the nastiest clutches. It'd be hard to talk about just without the visual aid, but he can be really good individually. He can be.
Okay. It's just I do think like one of the problems he has as an in-game leader is like, first of all, like it's funny that almost every leader's like this in CS. Whatever their strength is, I think most of them, their problem is they make the classic mistake, which by the way, most of them admittedly are under 30. And a lot of actual sports stars don't develop like advanced concepts until late in their career. Like, a basketball player might play in the NBA 5 years before he figures out what makes him like the #1 player, They might have had the athletic talent already, but what they tend to do, the mistake is, say you're like really amazing, like say one of your strengths as a basketball player is you have the best athleticism, you're the fastest guy. Right, what happens then is you go, right, well, I'm hard working, so I'm going to work all the time in the gym room, and I'm going to make sure that I am still the fastest. I'm going to put all my energy. But what you don't do is think to yourself, wait a minute, there's guys who can do things close to what I do who aren't as fast as me. So they're doing it with like knowledge of angles, timing, like tactics. If I added that and made that a strength, now I'd be unbeatable. Like, I think a lot of in-game leaders, because, they've only had these teams 1 year, 2 years. Some of them are still, like, going hardcore at their strength, like best tactics, or we have the best, like, adaptions mid-round. But not a lot of them have sort of developed essentially, like what we're talking about with the plan B. They haven't developed, like, one of their weaknesses to be a bit stronger and plugged that hole and therefore found another way to win. So I think Karrigan's problem is, it's actually kind of ridiculous you can have that much talent and not have any sort of base to fall back to. Like, how can North have so much better executions than a Karrigan team, So in that sense, I guess if he had a very good tactical coach, maybe they could help share the load in that sense, to answer the original question.
Yeah. So, I could see that. Like someone who works really well with Karrigan to like pass along some ideas and help him out. I think that's where we're going to see like this coaching eventually evolve into is not so much something that it looks like on the team wide, just someone who's like kind of like, the offensive coordinator quarterback kind of relationship where it's just two guys who get on the same page, who talk philosophy, who, you kind of figure out how the end game leader wants to call. And then the other guy, like they work together to come up with a game plan for each specific opponent based off those theory. I hope we get to a day when we can have something like that, where we have tournaments, that allow teams the chance to actually prep for opponents with this kind of a busy schedule. And I'll give you a little bit of like an inside knowledge. That was the idea of Blast Pro. Was when I know like me, Anders, and Chad and I had talked to them back in December of last year after the E-League major qualifier. They had mentioned what is something that you've always wanted in an event, or what is a way that we could do something with an event that no other event is doing. And I said, listen, if you're going to do this kind of a format, if you get the pick bands out of the way a week, 2 weeks in advance, so that all the teams know which map they're doing, and more importantly, the analysts also know, so that they can actually do research, and then in the future you can also build content around it. If you know these maps a week in advance, you actually give the analyst, the caster, something to research, something to talk about. We don't have to look at a 7-map pool and be like, which one could it possibly be? That's the situation where, unfortunately the schedule was like an event every week for the past like 8 weeks, so like no one can actually do anything. But the entire point of having the vetoes done in advance like that is to give teams and analysts and coaches time to actually just zone in and see if anything new can be created by a team on a specific map against a specific opponent. Like, do they find a weakness in this team's train defense? Do they just harp on that? Is it something different than what we'll see in other events from them?
There also was the factor as well, like, unfortunately, this ended up fucking blast, actually, which is that because Astralis came with what essentially became like a semi-mixed team, it took away every opponent's possibility to anti-strat Astralis. And by the way, they would have been one of the teams most primed to be anti-strat. By the way, they would also gain themselves from doing prep. It'd go both ways. And then the fact that they also did super well kind of kicked that in the guts a bit. And you're right, because there was a tournament the week before, teams couldn't really take advantage of it. Whereas if this had been like it's like I said, if that was the first round of the major and you knew the matchups and what map, of course teams would spend 2 weeks pracking for that opponent and figuring shit out, I like the way Moses just slipped in there. Like, when I was talking to the Blast guys at December last year, like, he then pulls out like a graph. Like, the tournament took place November this year. Like, and then, after the conversation, they raised me to the level of 33 degree Mason, and we all said the secret words, death to Bardolph, and stabbed a picture of DDK and Bardolph. And thus our plan was hatched.
Well, just to touch on the point that
yes, bring
that
it back
Moses
to the
is
point,
making,
please.
Was like the whole that'd be the best thing for fans as well, is the idea of having like a bunch of content creators and analysts being able to give you a reference point of what should happen in a match. Like Astralis like to run this B execute on cash, and G2 like to generally favor this side, this pace. And so then when, as a fan, you're watching all this content in the lead up to it, and then you see G2 or Astralis like change up something, you can really appreciate the fact that they were like doing something different, and that they had to make this adjustment to a team. And you can really construct narratives beyond just what we're talking about in generalities, like this team is an elite team, they like to play these maps, this is their superstar. You can really sort of dive into the micro of why these teams are elite, and that's sort of the goal for me in a lot of the content that I like to do, because it's about creating those reference points so people can appreciate changes when they happen.
Launders, can you make, you know that Stewie 2K video that Thorin makes fun of you for?
Yeah.
Lovingly, it's a
good video. It's a really good video.
Yeah, it's a good video. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you do
one of the best
one of those
fantasy videos ever made in the CS:GO domain?
I have an idea for you that will hit front page.
It's like Jerry Maguire. It was based on true events. You know, there's just artistic license involved in it. You know,
lots of artistic license. Make one of those about Taco.
About Taco?
As a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could put those two
take that event where take that game where he had 40 ADR across the whole map, and do all of his decision making process about why his decisions were made.
Listen,
well.
Launders would like to be alive.
Why they were good or bad?
Yeah, I would do video,
I could do that. Yeah, I'll look at it. I didn't actually watch the whole series, and that's how I was kind of looking at just the stats alone. But yeah, I should do that.
Because funnily enough, actually, by the way, anyone who wants to use this format, go ahead and use it, because it's not like this guy invented the concept. But actually in League of Legends, there's a guy called Mark Z, and that's actually what he does as his feature. He has a feature called the Blame Game, and what he does is he goes through the big Reddit threads for all the big matches in League of Legends, and he looks for like the really upvoted theories that are kind of like, you know, it was all this player, or this misplay here was so simple, you know. And what he'll do is he goes back and he gives his verdict, and sometimes he says, I agree with what they said, you know, actually that was the misplay. And other times he'll explain the nuance of actually, well, you know, if you actually look at the 3 decisions before that his teammate made, it actually put him in this bad situation where this guy lost the game, but you know, it wasn't necessarily his fault. So I actually think that would be good content if people could do it. The problem is, if you do it, you got to do it legit. You know, you can't just do it to like circle jerk against what people are saying to be cool, or you can't just do it because you're friends with the guy and you think, he's not that bad. You know, it's got to be one where you've got like a real good read on what it is and you can break it down.
First of all, I like Stewie a lot on a personal level, but that's not why I think he's the best player in the world.
No.
Okay.
Wait a minute. What?
I'm kidding.
He's really there. What did you say?
I'm just kidding, because like people always talk about how much I talk about Stewie, but
True.
I just think his decision making is actually incredible.
Yeah. He's top 2 on Cloud9.
Yeah. Just say top tier on Cloud9. Is that what you said?
No, top 2 on Cloud9.
Oh, top 2.
Top 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same joke basically, but better.
Right behind Scooter.
Okay. So anyway.
Well, I think this is a good time, since we seem to have fallen flat, to circle on to another topic, the one that Max brought up that he wanted to discuss. I think it was Max, wasn't it? CLG thing?
I hope you're not talking.
No, it was Launders.
Max wanted to talk about CLG.
Yeah,
let's get into that.
Not, yeah.
It was Launders. My bad.
So now we've defined what makes an elite team. Let's talk about CLG and the fact that they've actually had to literally do the old joke of like, last one out of the CLG house, turn off these motherfucking lights because that bill's getting cancelled at the end of the week. Like, CLG is dead. Rest in peace. Hotshot GG be that name. You know, come on, Launders. What do you think of this shutting the team down?
So I think this is, I don't want to say it's awesome. I mean, I'm sorry to, first of all the CLG staff and everyone is involved. It's like a big thing outside of the 5 players that are actually like in game. And, you know, a lot of people lost their jobs and so on, but I'm sure everybody who's good enough will eventually find new work or a new team or whatever. But that's why I think this is good, because I believe that you have like insane talents on that team, Kusta and Ethan. And then I think Ricky is up there too. And these 3 players all deserve to be on better teams. And with the thought that another team is going to be dissolving in North America, a lot of people are talking about that it's maybe NRG. If it is, if you look at how much talent is on that team, it's kind of crazy, because they have so much potential as well. But they have Cirque, And they have Ange. I think Cirque is like incredible, and then Breeze as well. So if Cirque and Breeze are on the same team as Kusta and Ethan, like you have another team that's talent-wise very close to Cloud9 and like is a brand new experiment, could be really cool. So I think that for ESL Pro League, it cleans a lot of things up because, you know, just because I'm supposed to tell it like it is. I think that like Cutler and Kusta. Now Ryu did say some good things about Cutler and that he always had shit rolls and did put up numbers for his shit roll. But in my opinion, like these two players there's probably players that could replace them that could put up numbers in EPL that probably deserve a chance. And I think it's
Cutler and FNS, right?
Fresh blood because what's that?
You meant Cutler and FNS, right?
Oh, Cutler and FNS. Sorry, yeah. And then
keep him correct.
And then on NRG, I actually think Daps is quite good and mechanically can be good, but I think he's not one to play for like almost a year now. So he's like talked about becoming a coach or a manager or something like that. Like he doesn't even, but they keep bringing him back. It's like that Chingy song. Like every time I try to leave, something keeps bringing. Every time they cut a player,
didn't even make the Godfather reference. Fuck these kids.
I know.
What is he talking about?
I was thinking the same thing.
You know that famous saying, like every time I'm
Godfather
out, they drag me back in. Yeah, Chingy it was. Yeah.
No, that's
what a piece of shit.
Okay, we understand. Yes.
I know your
like rap
Fox
music.
News audience is all over 60, and we got to talk to people who've watched The Godfather. But
listen,
you know, I'm trying to
I
bring
know that you kids like your rap music and getting lit and smoking that dro, whatever indeed that may be.
And getting that Skrilla, Duncan.
Exactly. Yes, getting that Skrilla. Yes.
But
and
okay,
pimping them hoes, but in a respectful manner because women need to be respected in the 21st century, and I'm with her.
Yeah, right before this podcast, I just got respecting so many women. So what's great is that
keep going. Come on, keep going.
What's great is that it's just so fucking refreshing. Okay, because I've casted like all of North America's games online on YouTube, unfortunately, but for both ECS and EPLs, I say for YouTube because not a lot of people saw them. But you know, it's just gross when you look at how good European EPL or European Pro League is. To see like some of the teams and some of the players that are getting too many chances in Pro League, and just for the chance that two teams maybe dissolve, maybe a couple of people fall out or fall into irrelevancy, and you know that's sad. But for the chance for new players to come in, and also for a couple of big orgs that maybe want another chance at Pro League to have like players that they can jump on, I just think that's awesome. Like it's super refreshing, and I'm really excited for that for Pro League for North America.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I thought when I saw the CLG thing is I want to know where FNS will go, because I actually still think that's an obvious... Like, these teams can't all keep saying, there's no in-game leaders. Here's an in-game leader. I'd rather have one better. Have you ever heard the phrase, beggars can't be choosers? Like, come on. You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I like FNS as an in-game leader for like an up and cut. He strikes me as like... And I hope if he hears this, he doesn't take this in an insulting manner, but he does strike me as like the MSL of North America, where he's going to be good for like a team that's grinding to get up to that top level. But I don't think as an in-game leader, and I don't think he would mind me saying this part, I don't think he's figured out how to get a team from like getting to that point and then getting over the hump into like the top tier. I don't think his tactics, when I watch them play are anything that's going to like blow you away, right? They had some cool ideas, mostly when Imapet was still there. But since then, it is like a very default oriented basic style, which is a great structure and a great concept for a team that's kind of coming from, you know, either Mountain Dew League, coming from the bottom of Pro League and working your way up. But you need that next level as an in-game leader to bring you into like the top 3, top 4 of the region. I think it's interesting that you think North America is so much fun to watch. I think all the talented players, launders, that you've referenced are like, well, not all of them, but I know when you mentioned like Cirque, like he's what, Bulgarian or something like that?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, Bulgarian.
And then Misfits, like finally, I think we've seen recently. Never thought I'd be saying this. Misfits hasn't looked half bad recently. Amanek and David Duvek have looked great. Six seems to be returning to some form. So that's a team that I know challenged Liquid in those series. I think it was for the major qualifier where they actually qualified to get to the major or the major qualifier. Jesus, that's
all right.
Well, listen, in my opinion,
I trusted Shazam to fuck it all up, so I've still got my golden ticket.
There is that, isn't there?
But in my opinion, none of these other teams even qualify as like solid pro league teams that can make LAN finals every time. Only Cloud9, Liquid, and I guess SK, which maybe that falls into the not so American argument, but like Cloud9 and Liquid, like for the two teams we have here, roster that even has Europeans on it that I feel like you can count on to make top 4. Now, Cloud9 didn't make top 4 this time around. That might be because they brought in a new player right at the beginning of the season, whatever. But they're definitely solid, right?
This is the problem with NAEPL is that you have like Cloud9 and then you have like Liquid. And I mean, SK obviously plays there, so we'll throw them in. And you can't even say this about Immortals anymore, but you have those 3 teams. And there is just a massive drop off from those 3 teams.
Except Renegades, maybe now.
Yeah, maybe Renegades has kind of got up there. But I mean, you're never going to see this disparity online, right? Like I'm looking at the NAEPL rankings right now, and everyone from like the tops, like, you know, Liquid and SK have 17 and 18 wins, NRG has 16, 15 on Misfits, Luminosity at 15, CLG at 14, Cloud9 at 14. Crazy that Cloud9 actually missed the playoffs, but either way, like those wins are so close together, you'll never notice that disparity online. But if you were to hold this season on LAN, like those 3, maybe 4 teams would just batter everyone out of the room. And that's the problem, is that there's not a whole lot of excitement in the lower levels. When there's always that conversation every single season of EPL, why does North America get like 6 spots at the final, or why does North America have the same amount of spots in the entirety of the league that Europe has? And the only reason I've ever been on board with giving like Europe like 16 teams and North America having 12 teams is the bottom 2 teams of North American EPL are just dead weight. Yeah. They just don't even matter into the equation of the season overall. They all like, and it's not a criticism of the players individually. I mean, maybe I guess to a certain degree it is, but these teams just like aren't good enough to compete in EPL, and that's just the kind of the reality of the fact. It's been that way for seasons now. And that's kind of the problem, is that there's just too many teams and too many matches that have no value to the season overall, and no one wants to tune in for them. No one wants to watch. Like if you put Rogue and Ghost Gaming in a server together, no one wants to watch that.
Yeah. Okay, so what I think is interesting is just that, like, Rogue, I definitely think don't have value, potential, or whatever. But Ghosts are 5 brand new players, and I think that some of their games have come quite close to taking like maps off of good teams in EPL. And I know no one here is like taking a closer look at like lower level EPL teams, so I'll keep it short. But I do think that's an exciting team, and I think that now I understand why you're saying like why do you think it is that you believe EPL is fun to watch? Because most teams are not good, but like and like a lot of teams in the middle aren't good. But our teams that are good are really fun.
I won't lie. I did a week of ECS, and I got to see the North American games for the first time, I think, all year since I did European EPL in the first season. And I mean, there's some cool new players to watch. I really liked watching Cirque on Energy. There's definitely some promise there. But let's circle this back, because I think we got away. I know the original topic was CLG. This kind of move doesn't necessarily surprise me, and it's not for any kind of Counter-Strike reason. I just know from like a business perspective, I know what recently Duncan, it was Nick Allen who took over CLG. He went over to the MSG team or whatever, and I mean, I just kind of felt it coming, because CLG's never had an emphasis on Counter-Strike, and this goes back to the beginning of 2015, right after X Games, when they were signed, and you could just tell they never really had an emphasis. They never wanted to spend money on it. They got into it because Counter-Strike itself was a growing game, and they got they signed someone for cheap, like a team that didn't even have an org before that. So I always get the sense that when there is like a new guy coming in who's going to start controlling the money and can start controlling the business operations, the first thing that always happens is he looks at it and he cuts something, right? He cuts something to get more budget or gets under budget. And you kind of saw this coming. All the players and, who have gone out and said, at different times, we've wanted to make roster changes. We've wanted to change 2 people, but the org doesn't want to spend any money. They want to do something for budget. I know even from 6 months ago or so, like talking to CLG, their esports director, he had talked to me about their kind of plan of how they wanted to find ways to have an impact on the CSGO scene without spending money. And they were talking about players who, like, they had a list of 10 players who weren't currently signed to teams. And like, they were players from Premier, from Maine, that they were scouting because they just didn't want to spend money on buyouts, which is fair play. But this is always going to be the result, right? Like, at a certain point, you do have to put some cash in. You do have to put some skin in the game to be able to get players who can contend. And I think what FNS said in his Twitlonger, and if you haven't read that, you definitely should. It was great. He nailed it on its head. Is right after StarLadder, there was that window where CLG had just done enough to be able to attract players to join the team, and they missed that window because the org did not want to spend the money. They had that placing when it was top 4. Kusta was playing good and Ricky was playing good, and they could have grabbed some player from somewhere. They could have attracted someone. They could have looked at options. They could have reached out to people, and maybe they did, and maybe we just never heard about it, but I doubt it. But that's where you could have made a change for someone, probably Cutler at that point, if we're all fair and honest. But that's where you could have made an upgrade, and they missed that window, and because of that, it was just kind of like that's where it's about to go downhill.
Like, I'm sure you, Moses, and the Launders must know this behind the scenes. We all know there have been players that were good players who the rumor was they might join CLG, or players in CLG like Tarek, like FNS more recently, like Peter when he was their coach, all wanted to get them into CLG, and then they could never make the deals happen. And at the time, sometimes it was left very vague as to why it was, maybe the person didn't want to join. I think if you look back now, that team has basically never bought big name players. All they've done is they started off with a budget squad. It became pretty good at one point. Then all the big star players left. JDM left, Tarek left, they all left. And eventually, as you can see, when all the big players go, and the rep is you don't have a lot of money you want to spend, crucially, you don't have money, people don't want to come there because, like you're saying, that timing, remember, like Star Series was in April. That's exactly when, if I'm CLG, I'm like, so wait a minute, at the same time we've got a pretty decent team, but without like necessarily all the best pieces. This Optic team's a nightmare with all these good pieces and no good in-game leader. Why don't we start courting Naf, Tarek, whoever it might be, and let's get one of these guys into our team, and then that's it. Then we've got the building pieces to actually be even better, whereas they just stuck with that lineup and somehow just prayed that it was the beginning, whereas, as you can see, it was kind of the best moment.
Yeah.
Never went any further.
It seemed clear they didn't care, yeah. Another thing is there was a clip on. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just because I don't like follow like that sort of online NA scene at all, and so I hear you guys talking about like this pool of talent in the outside of the top 2 or 3 teams in NA. Realistically, how many lineups exist from this pool of talent that could challenge teams like C9 and Liquid on LAN? Like, if you had infinite money and resources to assemble a lineup of 5 or multiple lineups, how many?
It's like a loaded question because you have teams, you have players like you have all of Ghost Academy, for example. They've got like a Proto, Odorous, and that are in Premier. You have on Ghost Gaming, you have Wrath, who's like the kid who just turned 16, who's actually got like a ton of potential, who's known like for everyone who scrimmed against him, just like a god. And then a lot of players on Ghost, actually, I think if you give them another season, they'll be a lot better players. And the thing is that you have to, even when you had Stewie, who had the fastest rise to the top of North American Pro League of anyone besides like Elige, you had him go from Open to Premier to Invite. In his first season in Invite, he was he was really confident, but he was nervous. He was bad on LAN. He wasn't playing like as anybody.
Well, then rephrase it away from LAN then. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So like, the problem is the LAN thing, and you have to give players chances. That's the other thing. You have to put them in high pressure situations for them to get used to high pressure.
Well, here's the problem though, Lon, is like when you touched a little bit on Renegades there. My feeling about Renegades is I actually feel quite sorry for that team because they clearly have improved a lot. They've made the right roster moves. They've gotten, if you actually watch them as a team, one thing that I'll say in their credit, absolutely, is usually when a team has the upset results that they have, it's like, right, let's figure out what 2 maps they're good on and everyone's going to ban it. I have to give them credit. They actually have a pretty decent map pool. Like, they go all over the place. They pick into what the opponent's weakness is. So, fair enough. The problem in their team is, so the best part about Renegades is they finally broke that whole we have to be Australian shit, and they got Nifty and they got NAF. Right? This is just my sense. In 6 months or 9 months, one of those two, if not both, will just go back to an NA team and they'll be on Team Liquid or Cloud9 or whoever, because at the moment they're just like, that to me feels like they'd want to ideally be on an NA team anyway. And this is just the stage at the moment. They're showing off, they're fucking popping off. When they get that offer, how are they going to turn it down? Unless Renegades can somehow get much, much better,
I think you can do that with Nifty because of his role. Naf because of his role, where he's kind of lurking. So you could just replace like a hard lurker and leave him to clutch because he's a fucking clutch genius. But with Nifty, he's actually created a whole system for the team that if you remove him, he's not only fucking himself over because he has to bring that into a new team, but he's also running the risk of that not possibly working with new players. And I think he has a good thing going. I just hope that they actually stay. I can totally see why you would want to replace Nifty on Liquid or put Nifty on Liquid in place of JDM, because Nifty's a way more proactive offer.
Or put
He's
NAF
like,
instead of where they would have replaced Stanislaw, that would have been a possibility.
Exactly. But what they have going right now is actually pretty solid. And
yeah, it's pretty good, right?
And Azure is really good. Azure's like really good, I think. So I think there is some potential with those Australians.
We've known that Ozza and JKS are both really good. But the issue is that the solution was always, I know for me, like the narrative around Renegades was like, when are these guys going to be the stars that they have the skill to be? And apparently the solution is they're not stars. Like they never reached that potential. They never kind of got to that point. And you bring in NAF and Nifty, who weren't stars in their own right, but they're the ones that reached it, right? Like they were like, NAF was always kind of a role player. Now he's like this kind of star, this fragging power. I think Nifty's one of the coolest stories that we have in North American Counter-Strike, and it is the fact that he used to be like a COD player. Apparently
he did that shit on thumbsticks, dude. Like,
I don't know what level he was, but that's an incredible story that he transitions to CS:GO, and now he's gotten here through like sheer hard work and grinding. Never heard him complain about anything either.
Exactly. So I mean, if you're amazing out there, any of those players who play COD, maybe you're in Optic or in Envious, if you just put in a solid 2 to 3 years, work your way through Premier, one day you might be on like the 5th best NA team. Maybe. Okay, maybe.
No, but definitely, I could see a world in where Nifty is able to. I think Nifty's able to compete with the best. I think if you put him on a team and you give him some time to fit in, I think he's got the skill for it. It's just, I think Renegades is very lucky that they had this. Maybe not lucky, but they're very fortunate that they had this success, because I think this team was a pit stop for NAF, and then they started, doing good. And I think now he has that kind of decision to make, and he's reconsidering it. But I think he would have been gone already if they hadn't had the successes that they've had.
Dude, I've always thought NAF was supposed to be a superstar, though. Like, I mean, remember when he had that ESEA LAN where he had like that map on Inferno versus Virtus Pro? I don't know, maybe you were probably casting or something like that.
You mean
it was like his breakout
denial,
event. Right? He did like it was a denial. He like barely made LAN. He got that one map.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everyone's like, that. When you see that, you're like, you see a ceiling, right? You see like, wow, this kid just outperformed an expectations of like just how well he can play. Did it in circumstances where the pressure is higher than like anybody would be used to. So clearly there's something special about this kid, right? That's what everyone thought.
Yeah, but it's how do you unlock that, though, right? I mean, he was one of those players also where, first of all, I mean, people have already seen that famous clip on Nuke, but he clearly did have some friction with teammates at times, and then you add in, just as a player, up until about, realistically, about 10 months ago, he's wildly inconsistent,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, it's hard to build a team around him, or rather, no one would dare, because why would you? You've got all these other good players in Optic and later on in other squads, so no one ever thought, let's go all in on this guy.
And I guess just the last thing is that I really hope they stay together, because my whole thing that I was excited about was that there are more good teams, not strengthening the teams that are already good. Because Liquid are fucking, they got enough, Cloud9 have enough, Optic have what they want, SK are perfect. Like, more good teams, like more solid competition.
To answer your question, Max, because I know you asked how many teams outside of like Liquid and
sort of what I was trying to go for.
I think between all the teams that are left, I think you could probably create one team that would be able to compete with them, and like maybe one pretty good team outside of that as well, with all the players from other teams.
Mm-hmm.
So would you be talking at like a Renegades level or above a Renegades level?
Yeah, there'd be like one team above Renegades, in my opinion, and one team like basically at Renegades level.
But like, if you even thinking that, isn't it crazy to think that those teams? Yeah, yep. And those are teams that aren't even, some players who aren't even in Pro League, right? Or are you saying that you took?
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna go that deep on it, I think one team that I'm keeping my eye on right now is this Rise Nation squad. I think this is a pretty cool team. I think they've. I haven't actually seen enough of their games to like know like play style or anything, or like who does what, but I know just from like looking at results, I know they just took Gambit today 16-10, which I'm not one for like awarding like moral victories, but for a team that's in Mountain Dew League, and yes, there's the joke that Gambit is also in Mountain Dew League, but for a team that is actually like in Mountain Dew League, while Gambit is way better than being in Mountain Dew League, that's a team that's a pretty cool result as like a stepping stone, because it's those 16-10 losses where you kind of get your sea legs under you, where you say, all right, that wasn't as bad as we thought. Like that was, we can go toe to toe with most of these guys on an individual level. So now it's just, what do we work on? And I think it could have even been closer, but Hobbit had one of those games where you just can't beat them. So I mean, that's a cool team to keep around. I know they've done some damage within the scene as well in some of the online events and everything like that.
I can't handle that. I just went on the Wikipedia, and the player in their team called Dazzle, right? His name is Will Loafman. How is that a real name? That's like something a little kid makes up in a story they have to write in like first grade. Like, my name was Will Loafman, but the people knew me as Bread Kid. Like, fucking hell, what is that? What even is that?
Oh, no.
You know, it's funny. I actually know his brother, and I've never met him.
Okay.
Like, his brother is just like a DJ. Yeah. And I have to explain to him every time I meet him. It's like, yeah, it's just a small world story.
Yeah.
But I have to explain to him how his brother's like nuts at this video game.
Okay. No, Bread. You got to keep on the same theme, you know. If his name was Will Nutella, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, go with it. Yeah, yeah. He's got a very rich play style, somewhat creamy, but not too much. You know, dark chocolate embers within there, providing a taste, a texture. Of course. Name being Loafman, you can see why he wants to be part of the Rise Nation, right? He's getting yeasty with this motherfucker.
Have we got?
I thought he was going to cool off. And he was just
we're back, boys. We're back.
Okay, cool. We can move on to the next
anyway.
Whenever he's going off on a tangent trying to make a joke work, and you hear that slight giggle before the next statement, you know he's stumbled upon something completely idiotic. That's going to somehow make you laugh.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, is that the end of the show?
Surely there's something else.
Yeah, I'm happy to not talk about it now.
Is there anything else?
Max, give us something profound, just in the chance that it spawns.
Yeah, what is no one talking about right now, Max?
I had a fun little actual factual for you boys. Exist at IM Oakland had his lowest KPR of the year, except Nip still won.
Oh, another one interesting about Nip is that with the addition of Rez and Draken, it's Forrest and Get Right that have been carrying most of the load and have been improving their performance.
Especially Forrest.
Yeah.
We're seeing the old Forrest skill ceiling emerge.
Okay, to tie it in then, okay, because when fans saw Nip win IM Oakland, I'm sure there'll be fans, not all idiots, by the way, just some of them maybe new to CS, naive, who will be like, why haven't you mentioned Nip? Why weren't Nip at least even mentioned with, you know, the G2s and the Norths of the world? If anything, they are a perfect example of a lot of the things we're talking about now. Like, Forrest and Get Right have been pretty good, but neither of them is on the level of Nico, Cold Zero, you know, the superstar players. Then you look at the fact that they have an in-game leader who doesn't always play the style that his team necessarily needs to play. That's why Threat is like so instrumental when he does all the timeouts and in preparing the team, etc. Then you look at the fact that they absolutely only have a ceiling that's good, and I think the average level of the team is a lot lower than people will account for after the Oakland win, because you look, even in Oakland, that was the best case scenario. That was where they won pistols, everyone's having great games, Rez has his best tournament ever in Nip, they get all the key turnarounds after the timeouts, they get their maps, they still narrowly won all these series and all these big games, you know, it's not like they blew people out the water. So sadly, when you then have a tournament that's not that great, it's going to be like Blast Pro, where they just get rolled over and it's done, you know.
But I think that this roster has the potential to be the best Nip lineup of all time. I guess, like, outside of the results that you can't achieve anything. You can't achieve.
Here's what Launders does. He starts with the bold comment and then he steps back. He takes one giant step forward for man and then two little bitch steps back.
Well, I mean, you can't achieve what you did back in 2014.
What have I done there?
2013. You can't achieve that anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, and then, you know, there's the competition was less thick too, so it's not like you could have that. Like, I don't know. I think that now it's like
so you can't get in that ass.
Thick.
Yeah. Okay.
Competition's a lot more fierce now. Nip have a solid lineup, and they can stay. I think it can stay in this top 5 for an extended period of time.
Wait a minute. He's done it. Guys, we did it. What he did was he danced around it as much as he could, and then he was like, right, back into danger I go. 2 feet into the pool. Nip can be top 5 for a long time. There we go. Right? No, give him a chance. Come on. Right, Launders, explain it to me. What do you mean by that statement?
Oh, because if Get Right and Forrest are playing well, I mean, exists that question mark right now, but them winning Oakland was proof that they have that same quality that Virtus Pro do, where they're, first of all, when they... No. What do you mean?
Virtus Pro isn't top 5, though.
They haven't earned that Virtus Pro legend status yet. They're not legends.
Oh, well, I mean, maybe not. Yeah, like this roster has not done the same things that Virtus Pro has over as long as Virtus Pro have done it. But like, what I'm saying is they're coming into Oakland with these 2 new players, but they're playing as if they've been fucking doing this forever. And like Rez Rez is awesome. Like Rez looks.
They have
like,
had those players for
Yeah,
about like 4 months, by the way. You know, like you can't just delete everything before Oakland. You know, I mean, obviously I tried my best, but it did exist. It did happen.
I guess Rez was on. I thought.
See, the big question with NIP is like, all right, if they're going to be a consistent top 5 team, then who is going to be their consistent star like Rez, who can have those massive games across both sides of the map, where he's just delivering impact and just being able to punish openings afforded to him by like these other elite teams that we're talking about. Because I can't realistically see how someone like Draken can be your consistent star with his style of AWPing and how NIP want to use him to be the change up of volatility. And I can't really see as well how Forrest could consistently be like this sort of player we're talking about. Maybe Get Right to a degree because of how like fundamental.
Why not Forrest but Get Right?
Because I feel like Forrest's aim style, is streaky in a lot of ways, with how he likes to focus on tapping and short bursts a lot, and also with how within NIP, it's just like, I don't think you can just have Forrest, even if he is maybe the most consistent star. I don't think you can just have Forrest as that main frag against teams like Astralis or FaZe. I feel like you need the entire team to be playing on the same page.
Well, I had a clip from ECS where I talked about how I thought this lineup would be like the best iteration of NIP or whatever. And I was saying because Rez is like one of the biggest stars in Sweden that we've like pretty much ever seen, like in the history of Swedish Counter-Strike. Like he had a lot of potential, and he's actually.
Did someone give Launders cocaine again before the show? I told you guys not to. He's like a gremlin. You don't do it. Don't ever give him that white powder.
Both him and Draken were talked about by like a lot of players as being the next people that should have been.
Listen,
every time you qualify it, it's all wicked. Every
top 20 players of 2016, pretty much every single like Nordic player. You know how it has at the bottom of the HLTV thing, like the players to look at for next year. It'd blow your mind the amount of them that said Rez and Draken is the next big things to watch. They are like the next crazy,
and then imagine a world where Draken fixes his interp settings and can hit everything that's just like right in front of him. Now you have like an hopping style that works, right?
I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, like, you have his style as an operator is not actually a big problem as long as he can literally just hit shots that are right in front of him. Like, just as Thorin was talking about, that is actually what is a serious problem, where that 30-degree window where he misses shots, that's like a real fucking thing for some reason. And as long as he figures that out, he is really fucking good and consistent, right?
The problem is, it's just like, that's not why NIP brought him in. It's like NIP didn't bring, because you look at like the problems NIP have historically faced. It's been like this thing of, all right, who's going to step up and make the play that has the skills and the like well-rounded individual style to do it. And it's just like, all right, you've got the skill and you've got that volatility in Draken to make those plays, but then you're not necessarily bringing him in to be that well-rounded element that have to be part and parcel with that superstar player.
I don't know how I missed it all these years. Maybe it's because he only talks about NA so much, but I should have seen it, Moses. Cloud9 fan, obviously a NIP fan. They are the Cloud9 of Europe, you know. I mean, sadly, at this point, you now make that comparison that way around. That's how fucking far they've fallen. But okay, all you need to know is this. Launders was like, you know what? If Forrest can just play really well, carry, if Get Right can be one of the stars, exists an X factor, you know, if he can step it up. If Drake can just start hitting all those shots he doesn't hit, I reckon, you know, 1 plus 1 equals 1.
Well, Forrest and Get Right have been consistent for a few months.
Been good.
So they just, they keep that up. For sure. Yeah. And like Forrest has that thing where he's like always turns it on when he gets a new player on his team. But as you mentioned, we're past that honeymoon period. He's still keeping up. So maybe he just really believes in the team. And then Rez has that ability to be like fresh on blood that's actually living up to
I think people probably know this about me. It's not exactly a secret, but I think Forrest in CSGO especially is like the ultimate fool's gold. Because if you ever, in fact, here's a great stat for you. If you go and look in all the maps that NIP won during Oakland, like the maps against SK they won, the maps against FaZe they won, he was carrying. He was doing sick. All the games they lost, nothing. Just non-existent. Now, coldzera, I've seen coldzera actually in most of the recent tournaments, like drop 30 in maps he lost. Like that guy is unreal just game to game. And his team definitely plays an element in it, but he can sort of supersede the team. Forrest, that style, I mean, as Max said there, it's like, it is just so streaky that even the style of play, like I don't even know if he could make that work all the time. Like there are very few players I can think of who have that style of player who are like, you know, I'm the best player in the whole world. Like, I don't know about that.
Well, yeah. First of all, like using coldzera as like an analogy for anything, I think is pretty unfair. Just because he is like possibly the greatest outlier in the history of CS:GO in terms of his skill set. His
So pick any other player.
Jump in.
Well, that and he gets extra kills every game because he does. Yeah. He does play like in his system. He plays a little bit slower. He gets extra kills. So.
No, but the analogy was. We're talking about NiP contrasted against teams like SK. Well, they have coldzera. You can't just go, well, it's not fair to say that they have coldzera because he is one of the best players ever. Yeah, well, that's probably why they'll be better than them then,
Oh, I see. But we're not. They don't have to be able to beat SK to be top 5, right? Like,
no, but you got to be able to beat Astralis. You got to be able to beat FaZe. These are fucking hard teams to beat, right?
The matchup is like NiP versus G2, right? Because they're like the two teams that are on the brink, and then it's a matter of consistency and who has the plan B. So I feel like maybe if we were to compare NiP and G2 and see,
I don't even think NiP's that high personally. I mean, is everyone else on board with that? The idea that NiP's like just outside the top circle and they're like sort of vying for a spot.
No, I mean they got a lot of points in HLTV just for winning the event, so they got boosted, and it helps the teams below that, like G2, like one Malmo and hasn't really done much necessarily since, so they haven't gained a whole lot of points. Same with like Cloud9, they haven't won anything, but they've gotten close. So I think that's just a benefit of winning the event, getting the massive amount of points. The big thing, I mean, you guys can talk about Forrest all you want. I think he played great, obviously, in Oakland. He'll fade away a little bit. We always knew Get Right was going to have a bounce back because we've had like a year of him being like not even in the server for the most part, and like you always knew he was going to come back up. So they're gonna even out somewhere in the middle for both of those regards. But the thing that scares me about NiP, I mean, first of all, launders. I think it's a bit bold to say that NiP is going to keep this top 5 off them winning one event when, like, before this we haven't seen this kind of level, like this potential out of them. So I'm going to be patient with that and at least wait to see what they look like the next event. The other thing is I think the tough part, and it always worries me when someone like when the coach gets a whole lot of credit for the reason why a team won an event, because if you're going to rely on threat to like anti-strat teams, if you're going to rely on a threat to have this team so well prepared the way they did in Oakland, as a team, they're not going to have that same amount of time to prepare in the future, especially, by the way, if they
only have so many timeouts.
Yeah, and yeah, there's that as well. You know? And if you keep this kind of performance, if you're NIP, then you start getting invited to more events and every single event. And then instead of attending 3 events over the span of 2 months, you're attending 5 or 6 events over 2 months. So then when you come home from an event, you're going to take 2 days off and you're not going to practice and you're not going to prepare. You're going to have matches instead. So all of that is going to limit Threat's ability to impact moving forward, unless NIP, goes through the whole thing where they start juggling the schedule to be able to take time off to do that. So I think it's bold from you. I like it, but I think it's like properly. Okay. I think we'll just have to see the next event from NIP to see where that can possibly go.
So here's one thing I will say, Lon, is that's actually the one area I think NIP might have an advantage over all the other teams. I actually think, when I said before there's no dream coach, I actually think Threat actually would probably qualify. He actually legit is a really amazing mind of the game. Seems to actually have a very, like, here's something a lot of people won't know because they won't have followed him 1.6 because he wasn't like the top in-game leader in that game. He was always on sort of the 3rd or 4th best Swedish team. He was always very good at not just having like in-depth tactics, but like suiting them to whoever his personnel is. So he's also like quite a realistic person. Like, he doesn't like ask more of a player than they could do, or he doesn't give the guy who can't do a lot like a really hard job. He's actually like really kind of knows how to tweak. He's not an idealist in that sense. He's not like maybe an MSL might design something that's too difficult for his team to execute. I would think Threat stays within his bounds. So the problem I see for NiP in that sense is, whereas half these other teams we were talking about have like a good in-game leader but maybe don't have the great coaching presence, I think they've got the opposite problem. They've got a wicked coach, but the guy can only talk 4 times a map, and you have to time out when they are, like, as in just literally have really good sense of when to use those times. And his in-game leader, I actually don't think's that suited to be in-game leader of a top 5 team if that's where you want to place him, So in a world where they could get someone else as the in-game leader, I could see it. I think the rest of the players are good enough. Like, if I'm not sure who it would be, obviously, because that's half the problem with Swedish CS, right? They're in their own mire for in-game leaders. But if they had someone where I felt like he was on the same page as Threat and he was either good or he could kind of sync up with him, I think that's a way, because obviously the good thing about an in-game leader is if they're really good, they can enhance everyone in the team. You can get that extra 10% of a guy you didn't know was there.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I was also wondering about, like, because like when they played their best 5 versus FaZe at Oakland, like they were doing some pretty sick stuff. Like their set, on Cash, they showed their reads were so on point.
Yes.
And that was, like they would hold a 3B setup for the entirety of the round, and FaZe would like make it seem like they weren't going to go B. They would just sit there. FaZe would like walk right into them, and that happened a lot. And I could even from the outside know what their read was, but clearly whoever was calling, and I don't know if it's Exist or whoever's like giving input or whatever is doing a good job. So I definitely think that they're weak in the calling department, maybe, but some stuff, maybe the mid-rounding is like particularly strong right now.
I think the big thing to notice is that Rez is not going to have the same level of performance at the next event that he did at this one. Like that's.
I mean, he already had the Blast.
Yeah, at Blast.
Yeah.
It's like saying Bitcoin's going to crash, Moses. You can't know.
I feel like you've opened a whole side tangential that we don't want to get into this episode.
I'm just kidding.
More bold predictions by launders. Bitcoin will crash within 3 months.
Rez is the cryptocurrency.
I more say that
until my new NIP cryptocurrency is launched. And God, what's going on, launders? Why isn't the crypto going up? Well, if Exist can just become an X factor, like fuck it.
Yeah, I'm saying just like okay. So how do you know that? How do you know that Rez won't keep it up?
That's just,
I mean, how does someone who did something
you have to look at the success he found at Oakland. Like the guy just had clearly so much confidence and momentum, like in his own game, just through each like series he played in each game. Like watching him on train, I couldn't even wrap my head around how he was able to just so like assertively do things against these elite sides as such a young player. And I think that's where a lot of I assume at least where a lot of the like hype around him as a rising star comes from, because man, when he's playing with confidence and with momentum, like we saw what happens, like he's just an insane player. But again, when you're talking about young players, and especially in a relatively inconsistent system like NIP, not like in terms of how the players are structured, but in terms of how the individual players fire off in that structure, then it's just like relying on things like confidence and momentum from one of your younger players isn't exactly the formula for long-term success in my eyes.
Exactly, Moses.
What exactly? Listen, he obviously, you can look at Oakland and his performance there. It was an MVP level performance. You could say he obviously has a lot of skill, and maybe he'll be able to realize it. But I'm going to go the route of the difference. Launders is you look at that performance and you're just like, all right, he can do it, so he's definitely going to do it at the next couple of events. This is his level, and I look at it and I say,
I've been casting his games for a long time.
Online, right?
Yeah.
All right, shut the fuck up.
That's whenever.
So I look at it and say he's going to have to prove that he can do this at multiple events before I'm going to believe in it. Like you have to see how it's going to be from event to event. And it's not, by the way, this isn't meant to be a criticism of him. It's just insane to think that someone out of the blue is going to be MVP level performances consistently, yes. That level of impact. So I have no doubt that maybe in a year, Rez turns out to be 100%. Some kind of a superstar player in the next lineup of NIP, yes. When maybe Get Right and Force have retired. But at the moment, like he's going to have this really good performance. He obviously didn't have one at Blast Pro. Maybe he has another tournament with a really good individual performance. But I don't think that Rez carrying through a tournament is going to be the solution in this short-term run. And if it is, then they'll have to change like who they're putting where and everything like that. Like that'll just have to change the way we look at NIP.
So I guess the difference is just like past the honeymoon period.
Yes,
for me.
I'll give you this, Launders. He's obviously the player who has the most potential in the team. Like the difference is Draken's flaws. I mean, I don't know how anyone irons those out. He's just got to work on them himself, obviously. The rest of the players are really old and established. But Rez is the player where clearly if he embraces this role and grows into it and continues to be supported by his team, probably could get better. With that said, though, one of the factors I think is his age, because he's only 19, but he's like the 19 where like in terms of top pro level, he's obviously only played for like 6 months. Like Epsilon wasn't making massive event finals, and in NIP he's barely had the chance. Like he had for example, one of his first really big games was that semi-final at Malmo where they played G2, and he was the one who shit the bed, if you remember. He had a really appalling game on Cash that like cost him the game. So this was like his first real big chance to break out. I always say with young players like that, right, there's two approaches you can take. You can either, you could obviously say you can go case by case, but generally I notice people either say, look at all the potential, surely some of them are going to come through on the potential. Not a bad logic, some of them are going to come through and become the next stars, but not all of them. And so as a result, the other way you go is you go, I'll just go ahead and say none of them for now, and then when some of them come through, I'll pick those ones, I think it's tough to predict potential with young players because they can be amazing or they can be shit. It's just the way it goes, right?
Yeah. I just wanted to, you mentioned Drake and how like it might be tough for him to realize his potential due to his style. And even though I was like super critical of him beforehand, I think one of the awesome elements about Drake and as a potential star is the fact that you don't have to train him to be aggressive. Like in an ideal world, as we're talking about, and all you have to do is get him to just be consistent in those mid to long range just sitters and just teach him how to pull back and play more fundamentally sound. And I feel like that's a lot easier to train than taking a super fundamentally sound player and being like, all right, now I need you to push through the smoke and no scope 2 players and swing around for a 180.
You're going to like this, okay? Launders, this one's for you, mate. So this is the moment where all the haters of Thorin come out and they're like, you never played at a pro level. You just shown how you don't understand this game on a basic mechanical level. Are you ready, Launders? Here's my theory on Draken. So I've seen a lot of players like Draken, actually. I think of like Chris J. No, I'm talking about Orpus specifically. I think of Makalele to a degree. And whenever I see these guys, right, their MO is the same all the time. They have like the 1 out of 3 maps that hit a bunch of their crazy shots and they hit those ridiculous flicks and you think, fucking hell, look how good this guy is. Like I'd even add Shazam to a degree to this, but I've watched his game less, so I wouldn't be as confident, right? But those players, when they have the mad game where they hit all the like 9 out of 10 degree of difficulty shots, you think, fucking hell, right? If they have that with any consistency, not even like, every game, just every other game, if you can do that, you'll be a sick AWPer. And what I noticed is they all are actually slightly subpar at the shots that an AWPer's supposed to hit. Like just you hold a corner and the first guy who comes out you're supposed to kill so that then either you can pull back or you can reposition for the next guy and your teammate can flash you out. They are all subpar at that. So you know what my theory is? People can say this is retarded or whatever. I actually think that they all basically use a sensitivity that's slightly too high for them, because I've noticed historically people who do that, if you put your sensitivity higher, go do it now and play 5 games. What you'll find after the 5 games is you'll actually start thinking, fucking hell, why didn't I do this before? I'm sick. Look at these headshots I'm hitting. It's like, yeah, that's because when you have the low sensitivity, you can't do a ridiculous flick like that instantly because you can't use a twitch fiber to do it. You have to use your arm. So you have to use consistent shots and technique. So it sounds like just a throwaway point because it is, but I just think that that's why you can't say for those players. But if they just make the consistent easy shots, to do so, I think they'd have to fundamentally change their whole game and then they'd lose those ridiculous mad flicks that they hit with a lottery high aim. So
the couple of those things, I don't know what their sensitivities are, but
I don't know either. It's just speculation.
It seems like they're still a little bit too high. I mean, it could be because you have more margin for error if you have a lower sensitivity. So it's smarter for an AWPer to have a lower sensitivity.
A lot of AWPers have low sensitivity, by the way, as well.
He has an in-game sense of 1.2, according to Liquid.
I don't know what that means.
1.2 at what?
What's the 360?
6 out of 11 Windows sense, raw input on DPI 700.
How many sense and effective DPI for 360?
CM out of 360 is 49.5, and then in out of 360 is 19.5.
Yeah, that's
reasonably
it's
low.
like
It's in the middle, actually, isn't it?
It's somewhere around Shocks or whatever, or Kenny S. So I don't know, but I think at the very least you have definitely have compared Draken to Makalele. I call it Makalele disease. In fact,
it's just like your it's like the same player, isn't it?
It's the most unreasonable thing I have ever.
Like watching him play, like for all the time that he played, it was like amazing shots sometimes, but couldn't hit the shit that was right in front of him. It's just crazy to me. It's like
I'm sorry to tell you that your son has Makalele syndrome. Oh God, what does it mean? Is he gonna? What's gonna happen? Well, listen. I mean, he's gonna hit some crazy shots. He's gonna have some good games. He'll be gone from the team in 6 months.
I was gonna say the only time
all players are different, right? All players are different. So
the only time there's some condition named after like a competitive athlete or whatever you want to call him is when that said person dies from it. Like you've just cursed Makalele to no end.
Well, because
I'll give you. I'll expand a little bit further. Okay, for anyone who doesn't know, here's a sensitivity that'll blow your motherfucking mind if you've never looked at it. Go and look what Guardian's 360-degree centimeters is. It is so low.
Like less than 20, right?
His sensitivity is ridiculous. No, as in like the amount of, it's a low sensitivity. He's got a very, very high one. It might be like, I'll have a look now, in fact, just so I can double check. It might have changed.
This is like 1.2 at 400.
Right, you ready? Okay, here it is. It takes him almost 80 centimeters to do a 360. Right? That means, like, the point I'm making here is, if you watch Guardian's game, probably the best flick shoot AWPer of all time, most ridiculous shots of all time, probably him, and yet he is using the lowest sensitivity of any elite AWPer you will ever find in Counter-Strike. Guess why? Because he isn't using the sensitivity in the mouse to hit those shots. He's just that fast. Like, that's nothing to do with in-game. He hasn't, like, tweaked it up and he's like, right, I can hit the really sick shot. He can just do that with the lowest sense. That's why he can do everything, because he can hit the normal shots because he's got such a low sense, and then he's just godlike, so he hits all the insane flicks, you know. Well,
here's the next question that you'd have to investigate is, like, does he boost up his zoom sensitivity ratio so that when he's zoomed in...
He uses a 1. No, he uses a 1.2, so not much higher, just a little bit.
All right.
Yeah. He's just a motherfucking animal.
Just a boss. Just a fucking
He is
boss.
actually a Makalele free for a few years. You know, he's been using protection.
Obviously the big...
Why do you immediately make Makalele syndrome an STD, Duncan?
Because I'm pretty sure if he could
get rid of it, he'd get rid of it. Now it's a syndrome, and now it's an STD.
If he could get rid of it, he'd get rid of it. I'm telling you.
Okay.
Actually, funnily enough, I thought it was very telling in the reflections I did with Makalele, that because I've always said, you know, he's such a streaky AWPer. He even said he actually doesn't think he should be an AWPer. He said what happened is because he just had a couple of teams where it worked, like NIP where they brought him in, people actually like sort of typecast him as an AWPer, and so in other teams they wouldn't let him be a rifler. I mean, admittedly, he wasn't like a godlike rifler, but you know, in his mind, I guess it makes sense he shouldn't have been a stationary primary AWPer.
Yeah,
isn't that sort of what happened to JW as well?
I think it was the other way around. I think what happened was he
around.
always wanted to be an AWPer, and then they were like, yeah, you're going to drop that now because Olaf's better with it. And he's like, oh, fucking hell. And then they were like, in fact, you know what? Shotguns only for you. Stand in that corner. Like, he actually basically, for the last 3 months of Fnatic, they were winning majors. He had a fucking dunce's cap on in the corner. He's like, can I come out now? And they were like, no, you had your juice box. Now stay in that motherfucking corner with a Mag 10. And if anyone runs around, just, you can't miss, can you? Just press mouse 1.
Jesus.
Love him dearly. Good friend of the show. So anyway. Is that the end of the show? We've got anything more about Nip to talk about?
Okay, well, I have one sort of thing to throw out if we're going to just tie
Let's
up.
go out in a blaze of glory. Come on.
So if Dennis is a free agent, Dennis replacing Exist maybe, and then say just fuck the fully well-rounded style and the default-centric T side they're trying to go, and they just start playing this new style. We're talking in theory here. With the nip control.
So it's not will it or won't it happen. It's what do you think?
Let's just pretend, because I like the idea of first of all changing up that 3-man core and also trying to play like a more looser style and seeing if nip in this sort of theoretical sense could maybe thrive in a looser environment where threat can come into a timeout.
I mean, Moses, you're going to have to learn to do this, mate. You're going to have to stop thinking about things that are like practical and actually would happen and learn to theory craft. Come up with cool ideas, spend hours and hours sitting around, ironically not high, thinking up just the stupidest ideas ever, and then just say, what do you think about these ideas, guys? And then when everyone's like, would that work though? You go, come on, man. Because that is like Anders' new fucking catchphrase, isn't it? Like, come on, man.
Wait, why is it unreasonable? Why is it an unreasonable thought?
Oh, it's not. It's fun, but I'm just saying it's not practical, is it?
I think Threat would first of all tear his beard out. I think that's a coach that you want to have an in-game leader with them. So I think they would lose a lot. I think we've gotten to the point now in Counter-Strike where we've seen too many teams try and come in, and everyone realizes you need an in-game leader, but everyone's just taking like a heavy fragger and turning him into an in-game leader, and it's like you can't just do that. That's not how you make an in-game leader happen.
Yeah, here's the thing. Fair play to Optic. Because Optic was like, we'll just take a low fragging guy, like in-game leaders, and make him the in-game. They were like, no, but he has to be an in-game leader as well. They were like, shit, I knew there was a... No, what happened is they folded up the piece of paper and they were like, wait a minute, there's more steps? Oh, shit, we only did the first 2 steps. Oh,
like, here's the thing.
Didn't Dennis ever call? That's what I
thought. Here's the problem with that.
He fucking hated it.
Apparently it was very loose, and apparently him and Flusher like swapped it back. It was mainly Flusher, and I think, as far as I know, even in Kingwin it was like mainly Rain. So as far as I know, I think he like the last time he was actually an in-game leader was like LGB, like 3 years ago. So I think actually he doesn't really embrace it, and he probably just does it when he has to. So like, I put it this way, if I had to guess, yeah, he'd probably say yes if it meant he could be in NIP, but I don't know if he would even like it himself, you know.
So toss.
I think that would actually destroy that team. I think it's kind of a cool idea. Obviously, you gain a lot of like playmaking from Dennis, but I think what you make up for there, you lose so much in terms of any kind of organization and structure. And I think what we'd start seeing with that team is players just getting killed before the team's even able to execute and group up as a squad and do anything similar to being a cohesive unit attacking the bomb site. I think you just have too many players bleeding on the sides of the map because they know we have a loose play style. Someone's got to make some kind of an individual play, and that's just what gets you picked off.
If I was going to add Dennis, I mean, I wouldn't even go with the existing one. I'd just take out Draken and put Dennis in and just say, there we go, there's my playmaker. I'm not going to have an AWPer, but Forrest can do it every now and then. I don't think AWPers are that required at the moment, especially since half the team's fucking forced by anyway. So I would say just put him in instead of Draken. Sadly, just knowing teams, bearing in mind they can't go to the major and fail, so they've already gotten over that, and that somehow hasn't killed the team. I feel like they're not going to remove someone they only added like 6 months ago or 8 months ago, whatever it was, you know. I mean, is NIP as well. Like, think how hard it is to get them to do a fucking roster move. Although at least it would be one of the new guys again. So they're like, well, it is one of the 2 people we're allowed to cut.
I was going to say, it's also the organization most resistant to change in the history of Counter-Strike as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't mind it though, because obviously the guys are started. So
I think Dennis should just come to Team Liquid. That's what I want.
But that's the classic thing, Moses. This is the classic thing in Counter-Strike again. What I've learned in Counter-Strike is that, right, okay, there's a famous saying, right, Moses, that I think it goes something like philology replicates ontology, and what it refers to, right, is that when a human embryo is growing inside the mother, if you ever look, it goes through similar stages of evolution that in theory humans did, as in it starts out, it looks like I can't remember what stage you go through. One of them, it looks like a reptile, then it looks like a small mammal, then eventually it starts to look like a human, you know, it goes like kind of like the chain of evolution, okay? So this concept, okay, if you apply it in this particular sense,
Jesus Christ.
Are you ready? Yeah. Where was I actually at the beginning of that point? I lost the point because
we're talking about Nip and Dennis and
that's it.
Zygotes or some shit. I don't know.
Wait a minute. Dennis, though. What does that have to do with Dennis?
Is he a lizard? Are you about to compare him to like a Komodo dragon?
No. But it must be something else. What did I say before that, though?
AWPers. We were talking about how Nip don't replace maybe the evolution of Nip.
New players.
God know if I could. Matt, you're asking us to try and get in your brain, which is like the hardest thing.
Let me think.
I really want to know where you were going with it.
Yeah, exactly. Sick, wasn't it? I was going to tie into something. Let me think.
It was going to be good. You were building up quite nicely.
Yeah, the first word of the sentence was theology, so I'm like, okay, let's just sit back and see where this goes.
All right, Duncan, you sit in the corner and you think for a moment.
I'll figure it out. I'll be a JW for a moment.
I know. I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you the other 2 questions. Do you think? Do you two, Max and Launders, think that this Team Liquid with Steel is going to be improved?
I miss Stanislaw a lot, but Steel's a better fragger. But I don't know.
I've got it. Before we go too deep,
she's back in the room. Back in the room.
We're back.
Okay, here is the point that I was getting to, because it's about Dennis, right? The problem is, I know Dennis is one of those European players who, for whatever reason, won't go to NA. And now people will always cite this as though it's an ironclad reason. Like, well, obviously he won't. Because what they always say is, he is married and just had a kid. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of something called, it's a very small thing, not many people are into it, called professional sports. It's worth billions of dollars, and every one of these motherfuckers, especially in certain leagues, won't mention which, see if you can figure it out for yourself, have kids like a motherfucker, and wives, and all sorts of shit. Friends with benefits have got them all. Mistresses, they've got everything. Now, they still manage to be professional players and move to new cities, new countries, because if there's enough money, and it's a good enough opportunity, and it's the right point in your career, you'll do it. So I realise, yes, maybe a year or 2 ago, especially when salaries were lower and people didn't want to move to NA, I get it why players wouldn't move from Europe, and they're like, I want to stay with my family, and I just have had a kid, so I can't spend much time away. As the game gets bigger and as esports gets bigger, that will not be a valid excuse anymore, Like, no superstar player in the NBA is like, oh, I would go to this team that could win the championship. Well, why won't you then? I've just got my kids in the school, so I'm not going to move them. Like, they all do it. They instantly. I mean, it actually fucking sucks being some of those players, because some of their families just go, like, if you're a journeyman, you just go into a new city every team, every year. Like, great. So I don't think that necessarily is a good excuse to not have Dennis be able to go to NA. The fact he doesn't want to go sucks, but I agree it should be a possibility, right? Like, if you have the option and he was up to it. Why not?
I agree with the point, but my question is how did the evolution of the human embryo tie into that point?
Here you go. Good question. So here we go.
I feel like it's the elephant in the room.
No. The point, the reason why is because, as I pointed out, when I explained it in a sports context, everyone here understood that not only is that like a valid and piece of analysis, but it's basically just an accepted fact that that's the way it is. But in esports, people still talk as though like, oh, well, how could Pasha ever be as good as he was? He has a kid now. Michael Jordan won all his championships when he had a bunch of kids. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, that has nothing to do with whether you can be a top player. The question is, does having a kid and a wife mean you can't spend time away from home, etc.? All these now, these factors only matter when you don't get paid 100 grand a month. When you get paid that much, your career matters more than everything. And esports fans will have to evolve and learn these concepts as we move on, even though actually the concepts already exist. That's kind of the point I was making. Like, if you just look at these massive sporting aspects, it doesn't really make sense, the fact that people can use these weird excuses. Oh, I don't want to play in a city I don't want to live in. Well, then in that case, the real question isn't why wouldn't you play? It's how much does it have to be? If I give you 200 grand, do you go? Eventually, everyone has a number. You know, I mean, football's the best example because in football,
everyone has a price.
If someone really pays enough, there is literally no team in the world won't sell a player, and there's no player won't go to a team because there's so much money in football nowadays. You know, so to me, these will all be solved. All these problems. I admit now it's tough. So that's the reason why I made that like abstract analogy, because I feel like unfortunately a lot of esports fans, esports is their first sport. They didn't follow the NFL or football. This is their sport. So unfortunately, they still talk about a lot of things as though they're like theory. Like, dude, you should have seen in some of the other games I was in. In League of Legends, people used to talk about the idea of having like an in-game leader as if I was an idiot. Like, no, why would I do that? Why doesn't everyone in the team just agree on what they want to do right in the moment? And then whatever the best idea is wins. And I was like, again, you guys are like fucking cavemen. Like, wheel? Don't need that. I've got a fucking yak. Why would I need that? Wheel can't even move itself. And I was like, well, here is a Ferrari, motherfucker.
Well, wheel rhymes with steel. So to tie into Moses' previous point about liquid, and we're talking about liquid as you were thinking, Duncan,
yeah. And steel
like
will not be at ECS.
Yeah, man. I just had to get us out of the fucking embryo state right there.
We're back again.
So in regards to Stanislaw and Steel, I have a general question. Is Steel calling in any way? Is he assisting with mid-range? Okay, cool. Yeah, because I remember
he's just calling Noah Winston saying, "You check these out. Check what out. These nuts." And then he hangs up every time. Very immature, actually. I don't know why he would do that.
These nuts, man.
Yeah, man.
And so, to me, one of the big things that was good about having Stanislaw in the lineup was that he could act, and like as he was lurking on the other side of the map, he would often be able to feed information to Nitro and make these mid-round calls. And I think he was pretty important in adding a layer of depth and another sort of factor in otherwise Liquid's pretty structured and default-centric style. And so I feel like you lose a lot of that like extra sort of X factor on your T side in a more macro sense, and how you change up strats and being able to quickly react to information on the other side of the map when you replace Stanislaw Steel. But then that obviously ties into the point is, does the loss of that outweigh the increase in fragging that Steel brings, which is obviously a big deal.
I like the trade-off personally. I want to see how it works, because that was the downside. The reason I had so much time for Stanislaw is, like you say, even though it wasn't always working, he definitely did bring this other dimension to the team, and I could see how it could have had a knock-on effect on other people. Problem was, they gave him his chance. He just couldn't frag for some reason. I don't know what's gone wrong with him. Maybe he's one of those in-game leaders who has to be in control to frag. Some guys are like that, you know. I just think, by the way, I was thinking about this the other day. It is actually nuts if you think about it, that a guy who was in a team called Optic, famous tagline of Optic, Green Wall, literally made the mistake of thinking the grass was greener on the other side. And what lurks in the grass? A motherfucking snake. There you go, in his natural habitat. Pooh!
My name is Tarek. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel.